Chapter 1454. They had met with Gray before and agreed to help the 5-star army. However, seeing the situation on the battlefield change, seeing that the Han army was about to be finished, how could they still care about such things? This was the human heart. Never expect promises to be useful, and never take agreements too seriously. When you are weak, even a dog may come and trample on you. Of course, not everyone was like this. Take Heck for example. He led his tribe behind. Since he had agreed to help Gray, he could not go back on his word. More importantly, Heck did not think that the Han army would be defeated so easily. If that was the case, why would he send troops to fight the Golden Horde? With everyone having different thoughts, the 3 marshals of the Mongol army all had their own thoughts. Shamask, the leader of the Cherkass people, and Mao Lahong, the leader of the Alans, had the intention of retreating. Under the constant barrage of cannon fire, they were suffering losses. They thought that as long as the cavalry charged into the Han army, they would be able to turn the situation around. Not only would they win, but they would also be able to get their hands on the powerful cannons. But who would have thought that in addition to the power of the cannons, the other party's muskets were also so powerful that they were able to stop the cavalry's charge? It was as if a natural dividing line had been drawn, and whoever crossed it would die. He watched as his subordinates charged forward and died one by one, and 2 by 2 died. In a short period of time, tens of thousands of cavalry died in the charge. Shamask and Mao Lahong's expressions changed. They began to feel fear. Unknown death was the most terrifying thing. Since they didn't know how long the Han muskets could last, Shamask and Mao Lahong didn't know if they should continue gambling. After all, the stakes were too high. If they failed, there would be no chance of a comeback. Shamask and Mao Lahong's expressions changed. Kagan Bola sneered and said, "Uncles, we have no way out now. You all participated in the operation against the Han army. Do you think that if the Golden Horde loses, they will let you go?" This. Shamask and Mao Lahong frowned. They did not know how to answer. Seeing that the time had come, Bo Lal said urgently, "All right, there are some things that can't be undone. It's still the same words, life and death is right in front of us. If we can't defeat the Han army, then our decades of hard work and effort will go to waste. Now is not the time to care about losses. Only by continuing to charge can we hope for victory. But if we hesitate, we will die without a grave." Besides, he had never heard of a gun that could fire continuously without stopping. Charge, there is no other choice. Yes, there is no other choice. When Mao Lahong heard this, he seemed to have made up his mind. He looked at Shamask and even spoke to console him. 2 against 1. Although Shamask's heart ached at the losses he had suffered on the battlefield, at this point, even if he retreated, he wouldn't have a good ending. He wouldn't even have a chance to fight for a second chance. Fine. Let's keep charging. I want to see how long these Han muskets can keep firing. On the battlefield, the Mongol army was coming to an agreement. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon, sighed as he looked at the scenes unfolding before him. What a natural place for a decisive battle. Looking at the empty space in front of New Sarai that could hold hundreds of thousands of troops from both sides, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh at how much effort the Golden Horde had put into setting up such a natural battlefield. But this battlefield, which was meant to be used against the 5-star army, was destined to become their graveyard. The gunfire continued. The Mongolian cavalry continued to lose men, but their momentum did not decrease. In fact, they even increased their power. If it weren't for the fact that the 2nd Division of the Cold Front Division had used their rocket launchers to dispel the enemy's momentum time and time again, the enemy would have already reached them by now. This was the bravery of the Mongol cavalry. They were fearless in the face of death. Even though Bola and the other 2 leaders had sent out a large number of warlords, the Golden Horde's control over the hearts of the people over the past 200 years had been very effective. At the very least, if it was the Qing army in the late Qing dynasty, they would not have had the courage and ability to face the 8-nation alliance. This was enough to show that the Golden Horde's strength was still at its peak. According to history, they still had a few decades to fight with the Rossi principalities. But so what? In front of the 5-star army, no matter how strong the army was, it was nothing more than a useless army. Everything depended on whether Yang Qindong was determined to deal with them. It depended on whether their existence was an obstacle to the unification of the world. It's about time. We can't kill everyone. We need a lot of slaves to build this place. Order the Air Force to follow the plan. Yang Qindong, who was on the White Dragon, moved his lips slightly. The commander of the Heavenly Language Corps, who had been standing at the side impatiently for a long time, immediately agreed happily. Then, he ran to the communications center and began to contact Division Commander Sun Lixing. In the sky above New Sarai City, the hot air balloons that first appeared here rose higher and higher as the battle began. They slowly left the people's sight. However, they did not really leave. Instead, they hid themselves and waited for an opportunity. They were waiting for the order to attack. Finally, after about 2 hours, Division Commander Sun Lixing, who was on a hot air balloon, received the order from Commander Tianyu. The moment he saw the contents of the telegram, he was very excited. He immediately said to the flag bearer beside him, "Raise the flag, order the operation to begin." The Air Force soldiers who had been waiting impatiently in the air were waiting for this order. After seeing the command from the hot air balloon, they excitedly lowered the altitude of the hot air balloon left and right, constantly searching for the target in the process. In order to cooperate with them, dozens of intelligence team members in New Sarai City had already begun to move. They were wearing brightly colored silk cloths, which they tied to the sides of their important targets to guide the hot air balloons in the sky. What were important targets? When two armies fought, before the soldiers and horses moved, the provisions would move first. The most important thing was, of course, food. As long as the army's provisions were destroyed, the soldiers would have no food. How could they continue the battle? They would definitely lose their minds and their morale would plummet. The 5-star Army's Air Force had chosen such a target. For this battle, the Golden Horde had indeed stockpiled a lot of food in the city. It was originally to guard against the Ross Duchy, but now it had come in handy. There are so many targets. Sigh, there is a lot of food among them. It would be a pity if they were all destroyed. Sun Lixing sat in the hot air balloon and held a telescope. He looked down from above and then shook his head. His face was filled with reluctance. "Division Master, give the order. The soldiers can't wait any longer." A messenger beside him, who was also a thrower, urged in a low voice. He had already chosen his target. He only needed to descend to a certain height before he threw the bag of explosives in his hand. "Okay, order each company to find the nearest target and attack randomly." Sun Lixing nodded. This was not the time to be merciful. War was like this. Most of the time, if you didn't kill others, others would kill you. There was always a result. Often, before such a result appeared, there would be endless killing. On the other hand, only by killing one side could the war stop and allow the people to live a peaceful life again. Therefore, in a sense, being able to end the battle quickly was also a good thing. Sun Lixing dismissed the messy thoughts in his mind and began to focus on completing the mission. About half an hour later, the hot air balloon descended to a height where it could throw the bags of explosives. Then, one by one, the bags of explosives fell from the sky. New Sarai City was engulfed in flames. The sudden explosion and the sound of thunder turned the city, which was the rear, into the front line. Countless houses and mansions of the nobles of the Golden Horde became the targets of the explosion. Countless heavily guarded granaries became the focus of the explosion. Amidst the sound of thunder, the sky was filled with flames. What's going on? The new Khan Bora, who was commanding the cavalry to charge outside the city, suddenly heard the continuous explosions behind him. He looked back with an ugly expression. The thing he was most worried about had happened. Instability in the rear was a military taboo. This would create a huge pressure on the already low morale of the army. It could even decide the outcome of this battle. "Great Khan, I will go take a look." Captain Mang Wuka looked back, his eyes flashing with horror. He was also very curious as to why there were cannons raining down from the rear, with flames soaring into the sky. Hence, he asked. Go quickly and return quickly. Bora nodded to Mang Wuka, then said, arrange for General Budwa, who is in charge of the scouts, to come here. I want to know if there are any more ambushes nearby. Mang Wuka nodded and left. Not long after, he entered the city. What he saw was a scene of fire everywhere. Everywhere, the people in the city were rushing to put out the fire. However, compared to the limited fire suppression, there were still bags of explosives falling from the sky, causing new damage and spreading flames. In comparison, the fire did not seem to be weak. Instead, it seemed to be getting out of control. That's where the granaries are, and there too. Heavens! Mang Wuka quickly looked around and was shocked. At this moment, he finally realized the seriousness of the matter. Almost all the granaries in sight were on fire. This was shaking the foundation of the Golden Horde. Chapter 1455. Quickly arrange for people to put out the fire. As he shouted, Mangwok turned around and galloped away. He wanted to tell the Khan about what had happened here so that he could make preparations. Just as Mangwok galloped towards the city, Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon, saw the flames in New Salai City. He knew that the Air Force had made a move. He knew that the plan to take drastic measures to deal with the situation had finally come to fruition. It's time to end this. Tell General Gray that he can start his plan. Yang Chendong's gaze was still calm as he spoke in a calm voice. The Black Cavalry had already received the order and spread the word. General Gray, who had been waiting in the army for a long time, also saw the flames in New Salai City. He became nervous and excited because his chance to make a great contribution had arrived. However, he was still faintly worried in his heart. He didn't know if Yang Chendong would give him this chance to make a contribution. Looking at the current situation, even without Air, he and the others, the 5-star army would definitely win this battle. Originally, he thought that this battle would be very difficult. At that time, the tens of thousands of people that he had prepared in advance would be able to play a role in determining the outcome of the battle. However, from the looks of it, his arrangements had become useless. At this moment, Gray wasn't sure if Yang Chendong would still use the backup plan that he had arranged. Just as he was feeling nervous, Yang Chendong sent a messenger in front of him and announced the military order, asking him to immediately attack according to the plan. Yes. Gray excitedly saluted with a military salute that he had just learned not long ago. After watching the Black Cavalry leave, he laughed loudly and said, "Good, good. It's time for this general to show his talent. Men, take out the red silk cloth and send the signal." The red silk cloth was the signal that Gray, Air, he and the others had discussed before this. The moment the red cloth appeared on the battlefield, the leaders of the small Mongol tribes that had been convinced by him would immediately change sides and deal a heavy blow to the Mongol army. The red cloth had already been prepared, and the soldiers who received the order immediately raised it up high. The long pole in their hands stood between heaven and earth, and at this moment, it fluttered with the wind. Because the red cloth was dozens of meters wide, it became a scenery on the battlefield that couldn't be ignored. At this time, Air he and the others were anxiously looking in the direction of the Han army camp. In just 4 hours, they had personally witnessed batch after batch of elite Mongol cavalry charging at the Han camp and dying on the battlefield. To be honest, they had seen a lot on the battlefield, and they had seen many one-sided situations. However, this was the first time he had seen such a scene where one side had suffered countless casualties while the other side was completely unharmed. Originally, they thought that the Golden Horde had the advantage in numbers. Furthermore, they were well prepared and had even chosen such a good battlefield. The Han army would definitely be at a disadvantage. If that was the case, then he would have to carefully consider what to do next. After all, if the Han army was going to lose, then he would be leading the warriors of his tribe over. That would not be sending charcoal in snowy weather, but rushing to their deaths. He was originally very worried, as he never thought that the Churkas and Alans would appear on the battlefield to help the Golden Horde deal with the Han army. However, he had already promised Gru, and had even accepted his silver. If he were to go back on his word now, wouldn't he become a disloyal and unjust person? As for what to do, he was in a difficult position. Even though he saw that the Han army had powerful cannons that he did not know of, he did not see any hope. In the past, when they fought against the White Russians, they had also used cannons. However, in the end, they did not gain any advantage. Furthermore, the Golden Horde had spent a lot of money this time, inviting so many helpers. How long could the Han army last? Once the cavalry charged in front of the cannons, they would no longer have the advantage and would be slaughtered by the Mongol cavalry. Just as he was feeling conflicted, the might of the 5-star army's muskets appeared. They actually formed a strong and dense net, making it impossible for anyone to charge in. Who knew how many elite cavalry had died because of this? When he saw this scene, he finally relaxed a lot. At the same time, he finally saw the strength of the Han army. At the same time, he began to worry that such a strong Han army would not be able to accept him. Humans were often such contradictory entities. When they had no money, they wanted to have money. When they had money, they would worry about not having money. He, who had unknowingly become the emperor of conflict, would occasionally look towards the Han army camp, waiting for General Gray to send him a signal. Unknowingly, a layer of cold sweat had appeared on his forehead. He had already noticed that as time went by, more and more cavalrymen died on the battlefield. Even though he and his tribe had been prepared for this since a long time ago and were at the edge of the battlefield, the recruitment of soldiers had already begun and were heading towards them. It could be seen that in at most an hour, it would be his tribe's turn to send out troops. If that was the case, what would he do? Resist? Facing the Mongol army, which was tens of times his tribe's size, he would definitely not be able to gain an advantage. Attack the 5-star army? He was afraid that the other party's gun wouldn't have eyes and would really shoot him to death. What should I do? What should I do? General Gray, what exactly are you thinking? He, who was feeling extremely anxious, focused all of his attention on the Han army camp. He could not care about anything else. He only wanted to take action the moment General Gray sent out the signal. This was also a way to save himself. Finally, amidst his anticipation, the large piece of red cloth that he had been thinking about appeared in the Han army camp. Signal, the signal has finally been sent. Warriors of the tribe, wrap the white cloth around your arms and follow me to kill. He, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, after confirming that his eyes were not playing tricks on him, how could he continue waiting? He immediately shouted and led the 5,000 warriors from his tribe to charge at the Mongol cavalry around them. At the same time, a few Mongolian cavaliers who also had white cloth on their shoulders raised their sabers and suddenly attacked their allies who were caught off guard and did not have white cloth on their shoulders. The actions of he and the others caused the already low morale of the Mongol army to become even more chaotic, causing their morale to drop to a freezing point. Before many of them could even understand what was going on, their bodies had already been sliced by the sabers, causing them to fall to the ground. The Mongol army became chaotic, and the chaos started from the rear. This scene fell into the eyes of Yang Qindong, who was carefully observing the situation. He could not help but put down his binoculars and laughed. Very good. Even a sturdy fortress is afraid of collapsing from the inside. After sighing, Yang Qindong's right hand grabbed the sharp saber by his waist. With a flick of his wrist, the saber was raised. At the same time, his shout rang out, "Warriors, the Mongol army's rations have already been destroyed by our air force. Now that they have started to fight amongst themselves, it is time for us to retaliate. This king gives the order, charge! Charge!" The 1,000+ black cavalry soldiers in charge of protecting Yang Qindong roared out in unison after hearing their master's command. They repeated every word Yang Qindong had said, trying their best to transmit his voice into the ears of every soldier. After the final word, the new Second Army, who had already mounted their war horses and had been waiting for a long time, charged forward under the lead of Commander Soder. Following closely behind were the 20,000 Mongol soldiers led by Ahuli. After these cavalry soldiers covered the sky and covered the earth, the 100,000 Mongol soldiers that had just surrendered charged towards the Mongol army under the lead of Gray, Baru, Wu Tuo, and the other generals. The retaliation had begun. Over 100,000 cavalry soldiers moved together. How could this scene be described with just one word? It was rather grand and spectacular. Even the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, who were lying prone on the ground, felt the earth tremble. As the division commander, Xiao Feng didn't need to turn his head to know what was going on. He couldn't help but reveal an anxious expression. In the past 2 hours, he had led the 2nd Division to fight to his heart's content. Although they had been shooting non-stop for a long period of time, many soldiers had become quite tired. There were even a few soldiers who had suffered light injuries due to their poor control. However, Xiao Feng and the soldiers didn't complain about their tiredness. Seeing the Mongol cavalry fall one by one under the muzzle of their guns, they felt both pain and joy. If they continued fighting like this, Xiao Feng could even boast that there wouldn't be any problems leaving these enemies to the soldiers of the 2nd Division. However, at this moment, the cavalry soldiers of the Cold Front had begun their charge. This also meant that his thoughts of taking all the credit for himself had been shattered. He had already thought that it was impossible to leave these enemies to the 2nd Division. After all, the 6th young master didn't just want to defeat the enemy. He also wanted to obtain this place and construct it. Once all the strong men died in battle, who knew how many years it would take to redevelop this place? However, even if he knew all this, the moment he saw the cavalry charge, Xiao Feng still felt a deep sense of loss in his heart. He knew better than anyone that once the cavalry charged, the Cold Front soldiers wouldn't be able to do anything. When both sides were fighting, the Cold Front soldiers didn't dare to fire casually. What if they hurt their comrades? Furthermore, the cavalry was running. It would be strange if they could keep up. He knew that he didn't have many chances left. Xiao Feng's heart skipped a beat. He simply got up from the ground and started shooting with the light machine gun in his hand while taking large strides forward. Kill, all of you, die. Xiao Feng, who was holding the light machine gun, made use of every second to initiate an attack. He fired towards the Mongol cavalry. Chapter 1456. Seeing how their division commander was acting, the soldiers all followed suit. One by one, they stood up and raised their spears. Some of them even jogged forward in order to kill a few more enemies before the cavalry arrived. The musketeers actually charged back, causing the Mongol cavalry who were charging forward to be stunned. Shouldn't they be defending? Why did they charge forward? Also, what was with the black mass of cavalry behind the musketeers? What was with the battle cries coming from behind them? What did the smoke and fire in the city mean? At that moment, it was not an exaggeration to say that they were surrounded on all sides. The gunshots continued, and one after another, the Mongol cavalry fell from their horses. They could not even get within 300 steps of the cold vanguard soldiers before they were hit by bullets that came out of nowhere. When more and more Mongol cavalry fell to the ground like dumplings, fear started to spread through the Mongol cavalry camp. One had to be prepared to die on the battlefield, but one had to know how to die. If they could win, they would be able to gain merit by fighting. Everyone wanted to charge forward, and maybe this was how they would fight for their lives in the future. But when they knew that they would definitely die if they charged forward, who would be willing to die? When a warrior who was proficient in archery and horse riding did not even have the chance to raise his saber, he did not even have the chance to charge forward and fight. Who would be willing to throw away his life in vain when he knew that he would die? Under the gunshots, the Mongol cavalry's morale plummeted. At the same time, many of them stopped in their tracks. They were all considering whether it was worth it to charge forward and feed themselves to the musketeers. At this moment, the cavalry of the new Second Army had already charged to the side of the cold vanguard warriors. They quickly passed by them, and each of them held a sharp sword as they charged forward. Their target was the Mongol cavalry who were hesitating, retreating, and whose morale had plummeted. Your grain has already been destroyed, and your Khan has been killed by the cannons. what's the point of your resistance? Those who surrender will live, and those who resist will die. While launching an attack, he did not forget to shout loudly to persuade them to surrender. Shi knew Yang Qindong's strategy very well, and he also knew the significance of these strong Mongolian cavaliers to the construction of this place in the future. With the thought of not killing them if he could capture them alive, before the new second army led by Shi arrived, his shouts had already reached them. The Mongolian cavalry did not have the heart to fight back. When they heard the shouts in Mongolian and saw the chaotic scene behind them and the fireworks in New Salai City, a warrior finally could not stand the pressure and threw the scimitar in his hand to the ground. He also jumped down from his warhorse. "Don't kill me, I surrender. Don't kill us, we surrender." After the first, there was a second, a third, and then a third. Then, there was the scene of the cavalrymen dismounting and surrendering. There were not only cavalry from the Golden Horde, but also from the Cherkass and Alans. Seeing that the general situation was about to change, they were forced to abandon their sabers and surrender. In front of absolute strength, resistance was useless. The most important thing was to think of a way to survive. The 5-star Army's cavalry charged into the Mongolian cavalry like a whirlwind. Following their arrival, the cavalrymen dismounted and surrendered. Of course, there were also some who refused to surrender. However, whenever they met such people, the new Second Army's soldiers would not hesitate to cut them down. At this moment, they did not have the time to do any psychological work with the enemy. If they surrendered, they would live. If they did not surrender, they would die. Their morale was greatly boosted. The new Second Army's soldiers, who had long wanted to show off, had high morale. They charged into the enemy like a dragon entering the ocean. Wherever they went, they would either surrender or die. Wherever they went, they did not look at any of the cavalrymen on their warhorses. For a long time, the new Second Army had been labeled as a rebel army. Although they had gone through an investigation and Yang Qindong had even said that the new Second Army was a good army with no problems, it was still not a good army. However, it was inevitable that there would be people who would point fingers at them behind their backs. As the commander of the army, Shi was undoubtedly the one who was under the most pressure. He had wanted to change this situation more than once, but he could not find the right opportunity. Finally, the new Second Army's hesitation on sending troops to the far eastern province attracted Yang Qindong's dissatisfaction. This also gave the new Second Army a chance. Ever since they knew that they were going to follow Yang Qindong into battle, all the commanders of the new Second Army, including Shi, had been waiting for a chance to avenge themselves. Finally, along the way, the new Second Army had shown enough strength to prove that they were brave warriors. At the same time, they also received another promise from Yang Qindong. After the Golden Horde and the Rossi Principalities were destroyed, the new Second Army would become the new Second Army, just like the new First Army. When they received this news, all the generals and soldiers of the new Second Army, including Shi, became excited. Everyone knew that the expansion of the army would affect countless benefits. A soldier could be promoted to an officer, an ordinary officer could be promoted to an intermediate officer, and so on. There would be countless benefits. The opportunity to perform meritorious deeds and be rewarded was right in front of them. For this opportunity to come, and also to be able to turn their ideas into reality, the new Second Army had been holding back a lot of energy since the beginning of the war. They wanted to defeat the Golden Horde, then the Rossi Principalities, and make the new Second Army a real army. They wanted to witness this part of history. With such a huge motivation, how could the soldiers not give it their all? Not to mention, the 5-star army had completely grasped the initiative on the battlefield. With the right time, the right place, and the right people, the new Second Army attacked. Like a tiger out of its cage, they gave off an unstoppable aura as soon as they entered the battlefield. The new Second Army charged into the battlefield. With high morale and firm ideals, their charging speed was very fast, completely catching the Mongolian army off guard. It didn't take long for them to collide with a patrol team. The patrol team on the battlefield was set up to prevent soldiers from being afraid of death. They had the right to kill anyone who retreated on the battlefield, which was why they were very powerful. However, being powerful didn't mean that they were powerful. They were just relying on their special status, so no one dared to attack them. That was why the army that charged out didn't dare to turn back. This didn't mean that they were stronger than others. In fact, many of them were just average. When such an army collided with the high morale of the new Second Army, the result was predictable. Almost at the moment when the two sides collided, the outcome was already decided. When the patrol team faced the 5-star army that dared to attack them, they didn't have any special privileges. All they had was to be cut down. When the raised sabers landed on their bodies and cut into their flesh, causing fresh blood to flow out, the patrol team members realized that they were just ordinary people. They weren't made of iron, and when a saber pierced into their flesh, they would feel pain. They would bleed, and they would die. After a series of collisions, the patrol team's courage was shattered, and their formation was quickly broken. The new Second Army treated them like they were nothing and continued to charge into the middle of the Mongol army that was already in chaos. When the patrol team thought that the danger had passed, Ahuli brought 20,000 White Russians and charged over. Facing the scattered Mongolian patrol team, they didn't show any mercy and didn't intend to let them go. Instead, they charged at them, forcing most of the patrol team members to kneel and beg to surrender. Reality proved that those who didn't want others to surrender would often be the first to surrender. This was what they meant by embezzlement. Just as the 20,000 White Russians took care of the patrol team, the 100,000 Mongolian soldiers charged into the battlefield. When the cavalry saw that there were either corpses or captives kneeling on the ground, they became anxious. The 5-star army had prepared great rewards for their contributions. Now that they had fallen behind, how could they be willing to give up? As such, when they passed by the patrol team, they glanced at the 20,000 White Russians and continued to charge forward. Although they were the last to set off, they wanted to charge to the front and be the first to meet the enemy. This was the effect of morale, and also the power of capital. When given enough benefits, soldiers would fight with their lives on the line. One was active, while the other was passive, so the effects were naturally different. When the 100,000 soldiers who wanted to contribute charged towards the Mongol army, it was truly a majestic sight, and no one could stop them. Before the 100,000 Mongolian soldiers arrived, Shibi led the new Second Army, while Ahuli led the 20,000 White Russians and charged into the Mongolian army. As they entered, the news of the rations being destroyed in New Sarai City spread like wildfire. "We don't even have rations anymore, so why are we still working for them? Why don't we just rebel and follow the Han army? At least we'll have food to eat and won't starve." He and the others were very useful at this moment. Especially when these words were shouted out by a few tribes, it had a huge impact. When some people heard this, they couldn't help but consider whether they would be able to survive if they continued to follow the Golden Horde. In contrast, the Churkas and the Alans did not have such worries. Both sides were in a cooperative relationship, so they didn't have to worry about who belonged to whom. Now that they heard that the rations had been destroyed, they were the first to protest. Chapter 1457. It was agreed upon when they came that the Golden Horde would provide all the food and fodder. If they won the war, they would be rewarded. That was the source of their motivation. But now, even the Golden Horde had no food to eat. What was the point of them staying here? Were they waiting to starve to death? When the resentment started to spread, the cavalry of the two tribes started to retreat. This exposed a huge gap in the front line, allowing the 100,000 Meng cavalry to enter. The Golden Horde's cavalry was already unable to put up any resistance. Many tribes even started to surrender to the Golden Horde. As the newly appointed Great Khan, Bola naturally saw everything that had happened. He hurriedly sent people to find Shamask and Mao Lahong. He wanted their support and was willing to pay a price for it. Unfortunately, the moment they saw the rations in the city burned and the chaos in the Golden Horde, the two leaders no longer dared to trust Bola. This man clearly did not have the ability to control things like his father, yet he still insisted on fighting the Han army to the death. This clearly showed that he did not know when to stop or when to retreat. How could someone like this be a qualified ally? The two chiefs were worried that if they waited any longer, they would be stuck and would not even have a chance to escape. They did not even bid farewell to Bora before retreating with their army. The departure of the two major tribes, along with over 200,000 of their cavalry, made the Golden Horde situation even worse. Especially when Great Khan Bola heard this news, he almost fainted. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They had only fought for less than 8 hours, and the outcome had already been decided. This was something that he had never thought would happen. In the face of such a predicament, even if his father, Mahadahan, was still alive, he would also be helpless. The success of the war was also beyond Yang Chendong's expectations. Originally, he thought that even if he won this battle, it would take at least a few months for the outcome to be decided. This was because the Golden Horde only needed to retreat to New Salam when the battle went south. That would be an additional barrier. Even if the city walls were blasted open by the cannons, who knew how many days the ensuing street battles would take to end? He never thought that things would go so smoothly. First, the cannons killed Mahama, throwing the enemy into chaos. Then, the enemy's morale was shaken, and they gave up waiting for the army to advance at lightning speed, scaring more than 200,000 enemy cavalry into fleeing. In this way, the difference in military strength between the two sides was not that great, and he even had a slight advantage in battle. Since that was the case, this battle was decided. Send people to keep an eye on the two tribes that escaped. I want to know where they are staying and their specific information. Also, stop attacking and use psychological tactics. The Golden Horde may have lost this battle, but they still have their strength. It would be best if we could use them. Yang Chendong quickly issued a number of targeted military orders after learning about the situation. Shamask and the other two tribes left decisively. They didn't say a word to anyone and just left the rest of the Golden Horde's army outside the city. By the time Bola knew that the situation was heading for the worst, he was about to lead his army back into the city when he discovered that the road to the city gates had been blocked. He and several other tribes were gathered in front of the gates, ready to fight to the death. This are they trying to rebel? Bolt roared furiously when he heard Scout General Bodo explain the current situation to his face. He was the current Khan of the Golden Horde. A small tribe like he wouldn't even give them a second glance. But now, they were being suppressed by the enemy. How could he not be angry? Seeing how angry Bola was and how he was about to give the order to charge, Bodo hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Great Khan, you can't. Our army has just encountered an unforeseen event, and our morale is in chaos. This is not the time to start a battle. We should rest, reorganize, and raise morale. Otherwise, this kind of army won't be able to win any battles. Bodo also wanted to say that this kind of army was likely to collapse in a single blow. If that happened, they would have to give up their last chance to turn the tables. How could the fuming Bola not know this? Although he was very angry, he hadn't lost his mind. It was because of this that he didn't give the order to charge. Alright, since that's the case, I'll leave this matter to you. Go talk to them and have them open the gates immediately. Let this Khan in, no matter the price. He knew that if he stayed outside the city without any obstacles, he would only be a sitting duck. Only by entering the city and relying on the city's buildings would they be able to fight a battle of attrition. As for the provisions, although a lot of them were burned, there were still some hidden underground in the city. This was probably a case of a crafty rabbit having 3 burrows. No ruler would place all their hopes on one thing or one person. Yes. Bodo had a bitter expression. He knew that the current situation wasn't a good time to negotiate, but since the Khan had given the order, he had no other choice. He could only agree and leave the central tent. After Bodo left, another general named Chiwen walked into the tent. When he saw Bola, he bowed and said, "This general greets the Khan. Uncle, please rise." Bola no longer had his angry expression towards Chiwen. Instead, he spoke with an amiable expression, even taking a step forward and making a gesture of supporting Chiwen. General Chiwen was different from others. He was a member of the clan and one of the fierce generals by his father's side when he was alive. According to seniority, Bola had to call him uncle. Moreover, this person was very good at fighting and was very capable. Because of this, his father was wary of him and suppressed him everywhere. That was why he wasn't very famous. However, this person's ability was obvious to all. At least when it came to war, Bola was definitely not his opponent. Now that they were in a life and death situation, Bola couldn't care less about these taboos. Based on the principle of a capable people do more work, he had to use Chiwen. Bola's courtesy made Chiwen shed tears of gratitude. Great Khan, please don't call me uncle. In front of you, I'm just an ordinary general. Ah, what are you saying, uncle? We are of the same clan. Even if our bones are broken, our tendons are still connected. Not only are you my uncle now, but you will always be. As long as I, Bola, am the Khan of the Golden Horde, you will always be my uncle. Bola's words were spoken with sincerity, and they came from the bottom of his heart. When Chiwen heard this, his eyes turned red, as if he was extremely touched. If that's the case, then I'll thank you. But what business does the Khan have with uncle? Chiwen's ego was so inflated that he would climb up as soon as he was given the chance. Bola was naturally very dissatisfied. In the past, he had his father above him, who had suppressed him for decades. Now, he wanted to be suppressed by an uncle. Of course, these were just thoughts in his heart. This was a critical moment, and internal strife could not be allowed. When dealing with talented people, one should be bold enough to use them and break free first. Thus, Bola cupped his fists and said respectfully, "Uncle, you've seen the current situation. The Sherkas and Allans are short-sighted and have abandoned us. Now that our strength has been greatly reduced, it will be difficult to fight the Han army outside the city. We can only think of a way to return to the city and find another way. But now that the road back to the city has been blocked, what should we do? Isn't that simple? Just kill whoever gets in the way. But rest assured, Great Khan, as long as I lead 50,000 elite cavalry, we will be able to enter the city in the blink of an eye and ensure your safety." Hearing this, Chiwen patted his own chest and spoke with assurance. "Oh? Do you need 50,000 men?" Bola asked doubtfully when he heard that he wanted the right to lead 50,000 cavalrymen. This 50,000 is not possible. 30,000 is fine, but they must be elites. It would be best if they are the golden armored cavalry by the Khan's side. Otherwise, we need at least 50,000 people. Chiwen seemed to be afraid that Bola would be unhappy, so he took a step back and said, 30,000 people would be reduced to 50,000, and 20,000 of them would be his golden armored cavalry. This made Bola's eyes reveal a difficult expression. Seeing that he didn't get a definite answer and wasn't rejected, Chiwen knew that there was room for discussion. He immediately said, "Great Khan, we can't wait any longer. Now that we have suffered a great defeat, the morale of the army is unstable. If we use ordinary troops, it will take a long time to raise the number of soldiers. Once the Han army completes the encirclement, we won't have the chance to break out. Therefore, I ask Great Khan to make a decision as soon as possible." Chiwen's urging clearly had some effect. When Bola heard it, his hesitant face couldn't help but become more resolute. Recalling that the golden armored cavalry was an existence similar to his imperial guards, he decided to temporarily hand them over to Chiwen. He only needed to give an order and they would return to his side. In that case, the other party only had 10,000 ordinary cavalry. They wouldn't be able to cause any big waves. After thinking for a while and not seeing any problems, Bola finally said, "Fine, since that is the case, I will leave this matter to Uncle. At the very least, we must open the gates tomorrow morning and let the army in. Otherwise, I'm afraid we won't have any chance. Don't worry, I promise to open the gates tomorrow morning and invite the Great Khan into the city." Seeing that Bola had agreed, Chiwen made a promise. Soon, the tiger troop talisman was in his hand, and Chiwen's anxious expression also calmed down. There was one thing that Chiwen had never mentioned to anyone. Not only was he feared by Khan Mahama because of his outstanding ability, but more importantly, his wife was once taken by Mahama because of her beauty. Mahama then snatched her away for a night. Chapter 1458. Things like this were not rare in the Mongolian upper echelons. Even a father sleeping with his son's wife had happened before. But the strange thing was that Qi Wen's wife was a woman with a strong temperament. With the idea that a good woman does not serve a second husband, she hanged herself that night before leaving Qi Wen's great Khan's tent. The next day, what was delivered to Qi Wen's hands was only a corpse that was still a little warm. Qi Wen and his wife could be said to be deeply in love. After a night of duty, how could he not be angry when he saw such a scene when he returned home? However, he was a shrewd person. He knew that it was impossible for him to fight against Mahama with his strength. Not to mention revenge, he was afraid that he would be captured before he could even enter the great Khan's golden tent. It was from then on that hatred was buried in his heart. It must be said that Mahama was a cautious person. After seeing that Qi Wen did not make a fuss, he always felt that something was wrong. From then on, he began to guard against him. However, because Qi Wen was indeed a good fighter and there was no evidence that Qi Wen wanted to harm him, he did not make a move. However, he also did not let Qi Wen take control of the military. At most, he only had 1,000 soldiers. Because it was a scandal, Mahama did not tell his son the truth. He only said that Qi Wen was too strong. If he took control of the military, he was afraid that something bad would happen to the great Khan. However, no one would have thought that a cannonball would suddenly take Mahama's life. As a result, he did not have time to tell his son many things before he died. Now that Qi Wen had finally taken control of the military, could he still continue to endure? Thinking of Bola's reluctant expression when he took the tiger tally, Qi Wen knew that he could not wait any longer. Otherwise, he really did not know if there would be a next time. Since that was the case, he decided to take action tonight. However, before that, he needed to send out the 20,000 golden armored cavalry. As long as this army was not protecting the golden tent, no one would be an obstacle on his way forward. Of course, there was one more thing that he had to do, and that was to surrender to the Han army. Yes, Qi Wen had made the decision to surrender to the Han army. During the day, he had witnessed the power of the 5-star army's firearms and was shocked. He had seen Russia's firearms before, but their power was limited. If he were to compare them to the 5-star army, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the difference was like heaven and earth. How could the Golden Horde be a match for such an army? Qi Wen was prepared to surrender even before he obtained the tiger tally. However, considering that he only had 1,000 cavalrymen, even if he brought them over, they wouldn't attract too much attention. Now that he had 30,000 cavalrymen in his hands, and most importantly, Bola's safety was in his hands. This meant that he had enough capital to do what he wanted to do. After pondering for a while, Qi Wen called for a bodyguard and whispered into his ear, "Make your preparations. Go out as soon as the sky turns dark. Find a way to find General Gray and personally hand this letter to him." "Yes," the guard replied. He carefully put the letter into his pocket, then turned around and left. This bodyguard had followed him for more than 10 years and had witnessed his glory and decline. Naturally, he knew Gray, who was originally one of the generals of the Golden Horde. Qi Wen was very relieved to have this bodyguard take care of things. After arranging this matter, he sighed and said, "Next, we have to go to the Golden Horde camp." This sigh expressed Qi Wen's feelings perfectly. It was said that no egg would remain intact when the nest was overturned. In order to take revenge for his own personal grudge, he had to sacrifice the entire Golden Horde. He couldn't bear to do so. However, if he didn't do so, he wouldn't be able to take revenge. Since Mahama was already dead, he might as well vent all his hatred on Bolal. Since that was the case, he had to repay his father's debt. Moreover, judging from what happened just now, the other party did not believe in him. Everything was done out of helplessness. Once he really killed his way back to New Salai City this time, he was afraid that he would be hidden very quickly. Even being killed was not impossible. From what Chiwen knew, Bola was even worse than Mahama. He was even more unforgiving. When he thought about how he was doing this for his own life, the guilt in his heart lessened. At this moment, Chiwen was thinking about whether his actions could gain the favor of the Han army. After all, he still had to live after surrendering, and he wanted to live a better life. No matter what, this could be considered a meritorious service. He just didn't know how great this service would be. Chiwen was worried about how great the service would be. In his opinion, even if he didn't do anything, the Golden Horde cavalry, whose morale was already low, wouldn't be a match for the Han army, whose morale was high. The only difference was that they would have more time and losses. However, when the sky turned dark, his personal guards found the tent of the Han army and asked for their identities. When they were brought to General Gray, he was extremely excited after reading the letter that Chiwen had personally written. He said on the spot, "If this is really the case, your general has made a great contribution to our cause. How about this? Wait for a while. I will ask for instructions from the higher-ups." Gray had reason to be excited. As a surrendered general, he also needed the support of military service, and the more the better. Gray's performance had been very good recently. He had successfully persuaded Hehe and 6 or 7 other small tribes to bring in nearly 30,000 surrendered soldiers. This already made Yang Qindong very satisfied. However, he used to be one of the 2 generals of the Golden Horde. His power could be said to be monstrous. If he wanted to continue the glory of that time, he needed to make more military contributions. But when he was fighting alongside the new Second Army, it was easier said than done to make any great contributions. Just as Gray was thinking about what to do, Chiwen's letter arrived. It was really a case of someone sending a pillow when he was sleepy. Gray instructed the bodyguard who delivered the letter and hurriedly rode to the main tent a few miles away. As the leader of the Yangxia, Yang Qindong's main tent could not be too close to the Mongolian army. Even though the Mongolian army had surrendered and was transforming into the 5-star army, he would not do any experiments. He would not stay with the surrendered Mongolian cavalry. On the contrary, he was surrounded by the Black Cavalry. The Cold Vanguard's 2nd Division was on the outside. Under their protection, he was very safe. Even if someone wanted to attack him, they would not be able to get close. The sky was getting darker. Yang Qindong, who had been commanding the battle for the whole day, was not tired at all. Ever since he entered the Grandmaster realm, Yang Qindong's energy had become even more vigorous. He only needed to rest for about 4 hours every day to be 100 times more energetic. At this moment, he was standing in front of the sand table. His mind was wandering. The Golden Horde had clearly prepared for this battle. They had set up a battlefield that was more than 10 miles long and 40 miles wide to the west of New Salai City. After all, if there was not enough space for hundreds of thousands of cavalry, they would not be able to display their strength. The Golden Horde had already set up the battlefield and was waiting for Yang Qindong to arrive. At that time, they would use their cavalry to tell the Han army that in such a spacious place, the so-called firearms would be laughable in the face of hundreds of thousands of cavalry. They would not be able to withstand a single blow. It had to be said that this train of thought was correct. If they were to use such a formation to deal with the Ross Duchy, it would be hard to say if they would dare to fight in such a place. However, in Yang Qindong's eyes, things were completely different. With the great canopy in hand, the world was his. With the powerful firearms that were hundreds of years ahead of this era, the open land was a paradise for cavalry. How could it not be the world of firearms? Thus, the Golden Horde, who did not understand the 5-star army, paid a heavy price. In just one day, Great Khan Mahama had died in battle. The 200,000 allied troops had all fled. A few small tribes under the Golden Horde's command had surrendered. They had lost more than 150,000 soldiers. The results of the day's battle were so glorious that it was beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. He originally thought that it would take at least a few days for a battle like this to end. However, it was the other party's ignorance that made the outcome of the battle clear. It was dark. Even though the battle at the front lines was progressing smoothly, Yang Chendong still gave the order to stop the attack. First of all, the soldiers were tired after a day of fighting. They would not be able to perform well if they did not have a good rest. Second of all, it was too dark, which made it easier for the enemy to escape. Since he had come this time, he wanted to solve this problem once and for all. Yang Chendong did not want this battle to drag on for another 3 to 5 years. His time was limited. In 3 days, they had captured more than 100,000 captives. These people needed to be settled down. Otherwise, if there was a battle at the front lines and problems at the rear, it would be a huge joke. Yang Chendong gave the order to stop the attack. This was equivalent to giving the Golden Horde a chance to breathe. However, it was only for one night. The attack would continue tomorrow morning. Given another day, most of the battle would be resolved. The success of the battle left Yang Chendong in a good mood. However, he still came to the sand table out of habit to do one last analysis. He was switching roles. If he were bowler, what would he do? No matter how he thought about it, he could only think of one possibility. He would charge back to New Salai and rely on the city walls to defend. However, Yang Chendong wasn't worried at all about this. Not to mention that he had already made preparations and arranged for people to guard the city gates, even if they could really do it, so what? With the field artillery, wouldn't sieging the city be a piece of cake? Chapter 1459. Furthermore, the strength of the Mongol cavalry lay in their mobility. They moved quickly and came and went like the wind. Once they returned to the city and started the battle to defend the city, it was equivalent to giving up their greatest advantage. Such an opponent was like a tiger without its fangs. What was there to be afraid of? Once again, after confirming that it was difficult for the other party to have any backup plans, Yang Chendong stretched lazily. Then, he said to Captain Xiao V beside him, "Get ready. We're going to patrol the barracks." Beta Persei was tired from commanding the cannons during the day. Just shouting the cannons made his voice hoarse. At this time, he had already gone to rest. Xiao V followed and served him. After hearing Yang Chendong's instructions, he quickly replied, "Yes, I'll make the arrangements now." Patrolling the barracks was one of Yang Chendong's good habits. After fighting for an entire day, the soldiers were very tired. Some of the recruits even developed psychological problems or were tired of fighting because it was their first time killing someone. At this time, it was very necessary to meet with them, encourage them, and promise them a beautiful future. After this matter was settled, these soldiers could quickly recover their mental state. Tomorrow, they would become elite soldiers and achieve even more outstanding achievements. Xiao V was making the arrangements when Vice Captain Ba Daojiang walked over. "Sixth young master," General Gray said that he has something important to discuss with you. It was already so late. If there wasn't something important, Gray would definitely not appear here. After hearing this, Yang Chendong's expression turned solemn. "Let him in." Gray lowered his head and entered the tent. When he saw Yang Chendong sitting in front of the large chair, he knelt on the ground. He was a surrendered general and had to abide by some rules. Not seeing his master represented a form of respect in his heart. Yang Chendong saw Gray's performance and praised him for knowing when to advance and retreat. "All right, raise your head. You did well in today's battle. Come, have a seat." Over the years, Yang Chendong had gained a better understanding of people's hearts. He was increasingly clear about what to say and what to do. Gray was extremely excited when he heard that his performance was not bad and that he would be given a seat. He immediately kowtowed to the ground and said, "Heavenly Khan, your subordinate has something important to report, so I won't be sitting down. This is a letter from General Chiwen of the Golden Horde. Please take a look." As he spoke, he raised his hands respectfully. There was a letter in his hands. Ba Daojiang hurriedly looked at Yang Chendong. After receiving his approval, he took 3 steps forward and picked up the letter. He first checked it, and after confirming that there were no problems, he extended both hands and handed it to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong reached out and quickly scanned through the contents of the letter. Then, he asked, "Who is this Qi Wen?" Reporting to the Heavenly Khan, Qi Wen is one of Genghis Khan's descendants. However, because his ancestors are not prominent, he is not very famous. However, Qi Wen is indeed of the same race as Mahama and the others. Not only that, he is also a general who is good at fighting. If not for the suspicion and suppression, he would be listed among the generals of the Golden Horde. Gray, who was kneeling on the ground, used the shortest words to describe Qi Wen's situation. He had heard a legend about the death of Mahama and Qi Wen's wife. At that time, he was serving under Mahama's Golden Horde and was the general leading the team. It was because of this relationship that he had heard some of the secrets. The circle of nobles is really messy. This was Yang Chendong's first reaction after hearing the story. However, he quickly returned to normal and asked, if that's the case, Qi Wen has a grudge with Mahama and his son. Yes, this matter started more than 10 years ago. It couldn't have been planned in advance, Gray explained. He wanted to use this opportunity to explain that no one would plan for a matter more than 10 years in advance. Furthermore, at that time, no one would have thought that the powerful Golden Horde would one day be destroyed by the Han army. Yang Chendong naturally understood this and nodded. That's right. So, you believe in Qi Wen? Yes, your subordinate believes in him. At this time, Gray had no other choice. Since he came to deliver the letter, it proved that he believed in Qi Wen first. Otherwise, why would he ask to see Qi Wen now? Yes, since that's the case, I'll leave this matter to you. If you need anyone to cooperate with you, feel free to ask. How about this, Ba Daojiang, you will follow Gray's left and right generals. If you need any help, you can coordinate. Yang Chendong thought for a moment and gave his answer. In his opinion, it was naturally best if Qi Wen could sincerely surrender. It would save a lot of effort and casualties. If Qi Wen wanted to make any moves, it wouldn't matter. At most, they would launch an attack earlier. At the very least, arranging Ba Daojiang by Gray's side was naturally to guard against Qi Wen. The way to use people was to use people with suspicion, and use people with suspicion. One definitely couldn't completely trust anyone, and shouldn't casually suspect others without evidence. If this matter is done well, General Gray will have made a great contribution. Even Qi Wen will have made a great contribution. This Khan can consider letting you lead an army alone in the future. If you want a horse to run, you want it to eat grass. Yang Chendong was never stingy when it came to delegating power. However, the prerequisite was that Gray had won his trust and had made enough contributions. Upon hearing that he still had the opportunity to lead an army, the kneeling Gray's face instantly turned red. Immediately, he started to kowtow to the ground. Thank you for your trust, Heavenly Khan. Please watch my actions. Gray's face turned red. As a surrendered general, it would be a good ending if he didn't get punished. Even better, it would be extremely fortunate if he could become a rich man and live until he died. As for being trusted by a new lord and being given military power, it wasn't that this had never happened before. It was just that it was extremely rare. Gray was still in his prime and wasn't even 40 years old. If he retired now, it would be somewhat regretful. This was especially so after seeing the power of the 5-star Army's firearms. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to make more contributions. This way, he would be able to obtain more when he retired. It could be said that a second spring had already sprouted in his heart. If he could lead an army alone, it would be better for him to complete his dreams and plans. Yang Chendong's words had also scratched Gray's itch. This could be seen from how his forehead quickly turned red as he knelt down and kowtowed to the ground devoutly. All right, you don't have to kneel here. This Khan wants to see the results. Go and make the arrangements. Yang Chendong waved his hand. He didn't admire someone like Gray from the bottom of his heart. After all, he was a traitor. However, the Golden Horde was extremely powerful. Even if he defeated them, it would be extremely difficult to be used by them. However, with someone like Gray, things would be different. They were originally the generals of the Mongolian cavalry. If they could fully cooperate with him, he would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. This was the reason why Yang Qindong promised Gray that he could lead an army. Of course, there was a prerequisite for all of this. Even if Gray was to lead an army, he had to be under his nose. Only then would he be able to take action in the shortest time and minimize the losses if things went wrong. Of course, the possibility of this happening was very low. After all, he had already betrayed his master once. If Gray did this again, no one would dare to believe him. Gray quickly stood up and bowed towards Yang Qindong's seat. Then, he walked out of the tent accompanied by Ba Dao Jiang. Gray was still very satisfied with this late-night visit. After getting Yang Qindong's promise, he was full of energy. As for having Ba Dao Jiang by his side, he wasn't worried at all. Instead, he was happy. He originally didn't have any intention of betraying Yang Qindong. Now that there was someone following him, he could see all of his efforts and report back to Yang Qindong. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Gray quickly rode back to the main camp. When he saw the personal guard sent by Qi Wen, Gray made a promise. He said that as long as Qi Wen performed well, not only would the safety of himself and his family in New Sarai City not be a problem, he would also be rewarded greatly. After the personal guard received the promise, he left the camp and returned to Qi Wen's place. He reported everything that he had seen and heard. Good, you did well. Go and receive your reward. Qi Wen's face was filled with excitement. Just now, he had arranged for 2 golden armored cavalry to leave the main camp and head towards the west gate of New Salai. Without these people, the defense of Bowler's golden tent would be useless. He could do whatever he wanted. Men, gather 500 Qi soldiers and follow me. Qi Wen knew that this was a serious matter. Naturally, he would not easily trust others. Therefore, he decided not to use other soldiers. He only arranged the 10,000 cavalrymen that should be under his command to the periphery to prevent others from spying on the golden tent. The ones who went with him to capture Bola were all his family generals. Some of them had followed him for more than 10 years, so there was no problem with their reliability. In the golden tent, although it was getting late, Bowler didn't fall asleep. He just lay on the bed with his eyes closed. All in all, too many things had happened in one day. First, his father was killed, and then he succeeded the throne. Then, Shamask and Mao Lahong escaped, and the defeat of the soldiers in front of him, and now he was trapped. If he could go back in time to a day ago, Bowler would never have dared to imagine that such things would happen. Now, it had happened. It was true that life was full of ups and downs. He was now the Khan. As long as he could safely return to New Salai, once the reinforcements from the Ross Duchy arrived, it was possible to force the Han army to retreat. When that time came, he would work hard to recuperate. Once he was strong enough, he would first deal with the Churkas and Alans. Then, he would destroy the Ross Duchy. Finally, he would point his troops at the Han territory. He wanted to let these people know how terrible the consequences of angering him were. Chapter 1460. Thinking of these things, Bo La unknowingly fell asleep. After an unknown amount of time, a burst of shouting came from outside. Only then did he slowly open his eyes and see a sharp curved blade against his neck. The person holding the blade was Qi Wen. At this moment, he was looking at Bo La with a smile, his eyes full of playfulness and mockery. Clan uncle? Seeing Qi Wen sitting on his bed, Bo La couldn't help but be startled. He was the great Khan. Without his permission, how could anyone get close to him? As soon as he felt the cold sensation on his neck, he immediately woke up. Hee, you're still calling me clan uncle. You're really kind-hearted. But do you think I'll believe you so easily? I'm afraid that once we safely return to the city, you'll kill this clan uncle of mine. Qi Wen said with a fake smile. At the same time, his right hand exerted a bit of force, and the tip of the blade pierced his skin, causing blood to seep out. Feeling the coldness and killing intent that could go berserk at any time, Bo La, who originally wanted to resist, immediately became well-behaved. He knew this clan uncle of his. Although he wasn't a match for 10,000 people, in terms of skills, he was far from being able to defeat him. Now that the blade was against his neck, if he made a mistake, he could injure himself. Having just become the great Khan, Bo La, who viewed his life as extremely important, wouldn't easily take such a risk. At this moment, he slowly raised his hands and made an expression that said he wouldn't resist or play any tricks. Clan uncle, why are you doing this? Your nephew really believes in you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have handed over the military power to you. Yes, you want to use me. Use my commanding ability and bravery to kill a path of blood and ensure that you enter the city, isn't that right? Humph. Speaking of using people, you and your father are the same. You and your father also don't easily trust others. Otherwise, you wouldn't be unaware of the hatred between me and your father, and wouldn't trust me so much. Ha ha ha, isn't that right? When he thought about how his beloved wife had been played to death by Maha, the expression on Qi Wen's face became slightly ferocious. Indeed, Mahama hadn't told Bo La about his grudge with Qi Wen. Perhaps Bo La also felt that he had done something wrong and had lost face. In addition, his body was fine, so he only needed to know about this matter. If he really couldn't do it, he would just kill Qi Wen. But who would have thought that the accident would come so suddenly? This time, he had left first, leaving behind his son who didn't know the truth. He had even put Qi Wen in an important position, so it was reasonable that he would end up like this. Even after Qi Wen said all this, Bo La was still confused. He still couldn't understand why this uncle of his would betray him so easily. Could it be that he had given himself away in some way that made him feel that he couldn't be trusted? However, it was useless to think about this now. Since things had reached this point, the first thing he wanted to do was to survive. Then, he would see if he could convince Qi Wen and take the opportunity to escape. As long as he could leave, he swore that he would send a large number of troops to deal with Qi Wen and let him know the consequences of betraying him. Even though he had an idea in his mind, Bo La still looked very obedient on the surface. Uncle, is there some misunderstanding? Tell me, and I will explain it to you. No need. Qi Wen interrupted him. What you need to do now is to be obedient and immediately hand over all your tiger troop talismans. Then, you can still keep your life. Otherwise, I won't kill you. I will only cut off your legs and make you a complete cripple. Huh, the Rossi Kingdom's blind Grand Duke, and the Golden Tribe's blind Great Khan. I think it will be a good story. Qi Wen was still laughing, but there wasn't a trace of joy on Bo La's face. On the contrary, he was afraid from the bottom of his heart. As a horse race, without legs meant that he would never be able to gallop on a warhorse. What was the difference between that and a cripple? If that was the case, it would be better for him to die. As for handing over all his tiger troop talismans, that was also impossible. Once he did that, it would be the same as handing over all his military power. What was the difference between that and death? Unsurprisingly, Bo La shook his head. The tiger troop talisman is the symbol of the Great Khan's reign. I will never hand it over. Oh. Is that so? If that's the case, then let's search. Qi Wen seemed to have expected this result. His voice rose a little. Soon, 6 bodyguards walked in and began searching the golden tent. The tiger troop talisman was an extremely important item. How could it be found so easily? No matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find a trace of it. Qi Wen's expression was somewhat ugly. He looked at Bo La, who looked like he couldn't hit him. He could only hatefully say, if that's the case, then cut off his legs. The turn of events was so fast that Bo La was caught off guard. Seeing the 2 bodyguards walk over with knives, Bo La's expression was no longer calm. He cried out in alarm, No, no, I'll give you the tiger troop talisman. Compared to losing his legs immediately, Bo La had to do his best. So he chose to back down. Qi Wen finally turned around and said, Very good. As long as you cooperate, you will be fine. Now tell me where the tiger troop talisman is. In the Great Khan's residence in the city, Bola said with a pale face. The Great Khan's residence? Are you messing with me? Qi Wen's face was filled with disbelief when he heard this answer. How could I lie at a time like this? Father died too suddenly. Many of the Tiger Troop talismans haven't been handed over to me yet. Bo La's face was ashen as he spoke. He was telling the truth. After all, this wasn't a normal handover. Everything was filled with too many accidents. Qi Wen carefully looked at Bo La and chose to believe him. Since that was the case, he didn't stay any longer. Instead, he looked at the 6 bodyguards in the tent and said, "Watch him. If he dares to shout or move, kill him. There's no need to be lenient." With that, Qi Wen walked out of the tent. His brows were tightly furrowed. He knew that things weren't going as smoothly as he had planned. Without the Tiger Troop talisman, he could only visit them one by one. He only hoped that he would be able to make it in time for daybreak. Qi Wen began to wander around the various camps, choosing a few familiar people of high status to talk to. Since he didn't have the Tiger Troop talisman, he could only talk to them one by one. Holding the jade pendant he had taken from Bo La, he began to frequently enter the various camps. Qi Wen didn't choose to rest for the entire night. Instead, he went to 7 main tents and met with 8 generals. What made him happy was that when he told them the purpose of his visit and showed them the jade pendant that Bo La always carried with him, everything went smoothly. Other than one of the generals who said that he would not give up resistance without the Great Khan's tiger seal, the other 6 generals all said that they would wait until tomorrow morning to make a decision. If the Great Khan really made the decision to surrender to the Han army, they would not oppose it and would even support it. After all, the Han army had given them too much pressure in the battle during the day, so much so that they felt powerless. It was better to just surrender. At least they could keep their lives. This was also because the Mongol army was afraid of the 5-star army. The cannons that seemed to be everywhere, the explosions that could land by their ears at any moment, and the endless fireballs that rushed forward made the Mongol cavalry unable to see any hope of victory. However, due to the strict hierarchy, without the Great Khan giving the order to retreat, no one dared to leave. Sometimes, even if they knew that they would die, they could only go forward. Now, with Qi Wen's explanation, everyone had a way out. Although they had the Great Khan's tiger talisman in their hands, the reason they gave was very normal. Mahama Great Khan had suddenly died, and the tiger talisman was still in the city, so they did not have time to take it out. Furthermore, Qi Wen had said that he was following the orders of the new Great Khan, Bola, speaking of which, he was the uncle of the new Great Khan. Could his words not be trusted? Of course, the main reason why everyone believed him was because they were willing to believe him. As long as they were willing, there would be no doubts. Even if there were doubts, they would be ignored. This made Qi Wen's action of surrendering extremely easy. It was so smooth that it exceeded his expectations. When the sun had just risen, his army of 150,000 had basically chosen to give up on resisting. When the sun rose, Qi Wen finally met with General Gray. After Qi Wen explained the situation, Gray was extremely happy. "Good, General Qi Wen. You have done a great service this time. I will definitely recommend you to the Great Khan. Now, let's discuss how to deal with the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry." Anyone could surrender, but without orders, the gold-armored cavalry would not easily surrender. Their status was equivalent to the Black Knights and Dragon Guards of the Yang faction. They enjoyed the best treatment and were also the personal guards of the Great Khan. Because they were usually treated well, they were all very strong and their fighting strength could not be underestimated. When it came to dealing with the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry, Qi Wen's face was filled with helplessness. It was not a problem for him to persuade others, but it was too difficult to persuade the gold-armored cavalry to put down their weapons. It could even be said that it was an impossible task. Seeing the difficult expression on Qi Wen's face, Gray chuckled. "Since we can't persuade them to surrender, we'll leave it to the Great Khan. We'll do it like this later." Gray had received a message from Yang Chendong early in the morning. The matter of the 20,000 gold-armored cavalry would be handed to him personally. If there was a cavalry that Yang Chendong valued the most in the entire Golden Horde, it would be the 20,000 gold armored cavalry. Chapter 1461. The strong were always respected. Yang Chendong was no exception. He was also curious about the famed golden armored cavalry. If they were really as powerful as the legend said, he would try to convince them to submit to him. With such a strong army, it would be a good thing for his strength. While everyone was scheming against the golden armored cavalry, the 20,000 golden armored cavalry were still foolishly waiting in front of New Sarai. According to their previous agreement, they had to find a way to open the city gates at night, opening a door for the Khan to retreat. And this matter was handed over to General Chi-Wen. However, the night passed just like that, and he did not see anyone come to give him orders. This made General Wu Shugu very puzzled. When the sky brightened and he finally saw his surroundings, he could not help but turn pale with fright. Around the golden armored cavalry, there were soldiers holding Han army banners. They were surrounded. Wu Shugu's face instantly became gloomy and terrifying. At this time, he finally understood that he had been betrayed by Chi-Wen. When he thought about how Khan Bola would be without his protection, he could not help but feel anxious. Everyone gather and prepare to charge. Wu Shugu was worthy of being a golden armored general. He quickly made the decision to charge out and meet up with the Khan. For this, even if they had to pay a heavy price, they had to do it. This was the mission of the golden armored cavalry. After the order was given, the 20,000 golden armored cavalry quickly gathered in formation, ready to charge at any time. At this time, the 5-star army that surrounded them also changed. The soldiers of the 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard rushed over, and so did the Black Cavalry. Even Yang Chendong personally rushed over. When he saw that the golden armored cavalry that was surrounded in the middle had already begun to form up, and there was no sign of panic on their faces, he could not help but exclaim, "They're really elites." True elites would naturally be able to remain calm in the face of danger and not panic in the face of danger. Many times, even when they were left with only 10% of their men, they could still charge and inflict heavy damage to their opponents. This was true elites. For example, the Black Cavalry could do this. In comparison, the 20,000 golden armored cavalrymen in front of him were not bad either. Yang Chendong had to admit that he only had 2,000 Black Cavalry with him, while the Golden Horde had 20,000 elite soldiers. This was the strength of the foundation. It was not something that could be achieved through hard work. "Young master, let me test their capabilities." Beta Persei had already put on a black armor and walked in front of Yang Chendong. It was as if he had a pair of dog noses. Once there was a battle, he would always be the first to appear and think of a way to participate in the battle. As a matter of fact, when he saw the powerful golden armored cavalry, he left the artillery position and rushed over. Yang Chendong was just about to test the strength of these golden armored cavalry when Beta Persei rushed over. Thinking about how this person had followed him for so many years, there was nothing to say about his bravery. Coupled with the protection of his black armor, ordinary people would not be able to hurt him. He nodded and said, "I'll give you 200 black cavalry. Remember to be careful. If you can't do it, retreat." "Yes." Yang Chendong agreed. Beta Persei was naturally very excited. He immediately nodded in agreement. Soon after, he gathered 200 black cavalry dragon guards and leaped forward, heading towards the golden armored cavalry that was surrounded. Beta Persei's voice was not much worse than a loudspeaker. When he was 300 meters away from the golden armored cavalry, he began to shout loudly. The general idea was that he had long heard of the golden armored cavalry's prowess, but he believed that the rumors were false. This time, he brought 200 black cavalry to experience it. This was the so-called challenge. If it was under normal circumstances, the golden armored cavalry would naturally ignore it. But now, they were already surrounded and had no other choice. Seeing that the enemy had sent out 200 cavalrymen, Wuxia hesitated for a moment, then also ordered 200 cavalrymen to go forward. Wuxia naturally had his own plans. He had already thought it through. Once the 200 cavalrymen gained the upper hand and defeated the Han army, he would take advantage of the momentum to charge forward. As for whether the golden armored cavalry could win, Wuxia was not worried. At the very least, ever since he became a golden armored general, he had never met any cavalrymen who were a match for him in a one-on-one situation. The other party accepted the challenge and Beta Persei laughed heartily. Good, since you've agreed to my request, if you want to surrender when you're no match for me, I'll promise to spare your lives. Ha ha ha. Beta Persei's bold laughter rang in the ears of the golden armored cavalry and caused their eyes to spit fire. Since he dared to look down on the golden armored cavalry, they would use facts to speak for themselves and teach this arrogant Han general a lesson. The black cavalry also looked at the 200 golden armored cavalry with angry gazes. The black cavalry had always been synonymous with the strongest cavalry. Even the current number 1 cavalry army in the world had to admit this point. But now, there was actually a cavalry that dared to call themselves the king of cavalry. How could they accept this? The strong were all proud and no one wanted to admit that they were inferior to others. So at this moment, they were also holding back their strength and wanted to perform well. Everyone, listen up. When you attack later, don't hold back. These opponents are not simple. It's time to show the might of the black cavalry. Come, let's use the 3-3 formation and the arrow formation. Attack. Although Beta Persei laughed arrogantly, he was still very cautious. Since the golden armored cavalry was praised by many people, they must not be ordinary people. Even so, he certainly would not be careless. Beta Persei led the 200 black cavalry to attack first. 15 people formed an arrow formation and each formation was divided into 5 groups. They could fight in groups or one-on-one. This was the most common way of fighting for the black cavalry. Attack. A centurion of the golden armored cavalry also shouted and led the 200 cavalry to launch a counterattack. Unlike the black cavalry, they were in groups of 50 and came in a square formation. Cavalry was different from infantry. Infantry could use their feet to control their position at will. Naturally, it was a simple matter to arrange them into a square formation. But cavalry was different. They relied on their warhorses. It was easier to form a square formation when moving, but to be able to maintain such a formation when charging at high speed was already not a simple matter. Not bad, Yang Chendong, who was standing in the distance, saw all of this and could not help but nod in satisfaction. Then he stared at the battlefield, not wanting to miss a single detail. He wanted to learn from the strengths of the golden armored cavalry and see what he could learn from them. One of them took the form of a sharp arrow formation, while the other took the form of an overlapping square formation. The distance between the two sides was only 300 meters. In less than 10 breaths, they collided. The cavalry's speed advantage was not fully displayed. The reason why cavalry was known as the kings of the land before firearms were popular was because of their speed. Many times, they could use their high speed to display 10 times their strength. Often in high speed, a casual swing of their swords could quickly cut off the head of an infantry. But once the cavalry lost their speed advantage, their strength would be greatly reduced. Just like now, both sides could not display their speed. The moment they collided, they had to rely on their own brute force to suppress the opponent. To be able to become a golden armored cavalry, they were usually treated well. In other words, they ate well. Compared to the sallow and emaciated bodies of the ordinary cavalry, they were all sturdy and muscular. Naturally, their strength was not weak either. So when they could not increase their speed and had to compete in strength, their eyes revealed a mocking expression. It was as if they were saying that they would definitely win if they competed in strength. But as the saying goes, there is always someone better. To be able to become a member of the Black Cavalry, not only did their loyalty have to be very reliable, their own strength was also quite good. For example, before entering this group, there was a special test for strength. A trial stone that weighed 60 pounds. Only those who could lift it with one arm were considered qualified. Their strength was not small to begin with. After becoming a member of the Black Knight Dragon Guards, not only did they eat good food, but they also ate very nutritious food, which allowed them to fully display their potential. In comparison, they were more than one level higher than the golden armored cavalry in terms of foundation. So when it came to competing in strength, Beta Persei and the others' eyes lit up. Dang dang, ding ding, quang quang, when the collision began, both sides swung their swords confidently, hoping that the moment the other party's sword left their hands would appear. But unfortunately, this scene did not happen. What happened was that about 40 cavalrymen fell from their horses. Both sides were elites, so naturally, they would not easily let go of their weapons. So even if their strength was inferior, they did not throw their weapons away. Instead, they were brought to their horses by the tremendous force. As the saying goes, if the sword exists, the people exist. If the sword dies, the people die. Of course, the more than 40 people who fell from their horses were all golden armored cavalry, without exception. From this point of view, in terms of strength, the black cavalry was already superior. Hiss. When the centurion of the golden armored cavalry saw that the people who fell from their horses were his own soldiers, he could not help but gasp. No one knew better than him how powerful his soldiers were. But even so, they were still no match for these Han army's black cavalry. What kind of strength does the other party have? In the first round, the black cavalry won. After the two sides crossed each other, no one made a move. Instead, they looked at each other, as if taking the opportunity to recharge their strength. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the golden armored cavalry who fell from their horses also quickly jumped back on their horses. Although some people still felt their arms trembling, it was obviously not easy for the strong to admit defeat so easily. Chapter 1462. The defeated golden armored cavalry mounted their horses again. Beta Persei did not stop them when he saw this. What he wanted to do was to completely trample the other party under his feet. He wanted to convince them wholeheartedly. Since he could knock the other party off their horses once, he could do it a second time and a third time. After about half a cup of tea's time, both sides launched a second charge at the same time. After the previous failure, the golden armored cavalry changed their attack method this time. Their cavalry phalanx also began to work. They actually charged at dozens of black cavalry with overlapping attacks. They gave up the opportunity to attack the other black cavalry. They only chose to fight behind some people with their swords, maintaining the power of the phalanx. Often, after the black cavalry fought with one person, before they were ready, the second person would come up and fight to the death. In this way, it was equivalent to one black cavalry continuously challenging more than 3 golden armored cavalry. In this way, their strength would inevitably be somewhat lacking. After fighting for a while, there were 4 black cavalry soldiers who fell off their horses with their swords. Looking at the golden armored cavalry, although 3 of them fell off their horses, it was obviously a reversal of the situation compared to the first round. The 4 black cavalry soldiers who fell off their horses had each fought with at least 5 enemy riders. Otherwise, they would not be so weak. After seeing the two sides pass each other, the 3 golden armored cavalry who fell off their horses got back on their horses again. The 4 black cavalry soldiers also wanted to follow suit. But they were stopped by Beta Persei. You all retreat first, go back and rest well. Beta Persei gave the 4 of them a comforting look. This was not because their skills were inferior, but because the golden armored cavalry had violated the rules of the battlefield. These 4 people just happened to be unlucky. Even if it was someone else in their position, they would not be able to withstand it. The black cavalry's military rules were quite strict. Since Beta Persei said so, the 4 of them had to obey even if they were somewhat dissatisfied. Immediately, he cupped his fists and left the battlefield. Seeing the 4 of them rush back, Yang Chendong said to Captain Xiao Vi, "Go and comfort them. This battle wasn't their fault." Yes. Xiao Vi was touched and nodded. Although he could see that these 4 warriors were not weaker than others, they were just unlucky to have been targeted. However, a defeat was a defeat. If he was punished for this, there was nothing he could say. However, now that Yang Chendong had asked him to comfort them, it was obvious that he did not blame the 4 of them. Not only were they not reprimanded after losing the battle, but they were also personally comforted by the sixth young master. Obviously, these 4 people would be fine. As the captain, Qiu Vi was touched and happy to see Yang Chendong care for the soldiers so much. The 4 dismounted black cavalry soldiers were sent back. When the centurion of the golden armored cavalry saw this, his expression was a little unnatural. It was no wonder. After his soldiers fell off their horses, they could get back on their horses and fight again. However, the opponents took the initiative to retreat after falling off their horses. No matter how he looked at it, they were at a disadvantage. In fact, the centurion of the golden armored cavalry misunderstood. The reason why Beta Persei let the 4 of them rest was because they were all injured. They would not be able to do much if they continued fighting. Since that was the case, it was better to be magnanimous this time. Not only could he ensure their safety, but he could also show his righteousness. It was the best of both worlds. Come. Let's fight again. Beta Persei saw that half a cup of tea's time had passed and shouted without holding back. He had no intention of changing his strategy. This development was due to his confidence in the celestial sword in his hand. He firmly believed that if they continued to fight like this, the other party's scimitar would break sooner or later. Then, it would be time for them to win. True combat strength did not only refer to a person's bravery, courage, and fear of death. It was also one of the criteria for measuring the quality of one's luck and equipment. It was precisely because of this confidence that Beta Persei dared to continue fighting like this. The Black Cavalry had no intention of changing their strategy and continued to be tired out by the overlapping tactics of the Golden Armored Cavalry. After 3 consecutive rounds, another 16 Black Cavalry fell off their horses and withdrew from the battle. As a result, the Golden Armored Cavalry's strength increased by 20 people. No matter how one looked at it, they seemed to have the upper hand. The centurion who led the team this time had a confident smile on his face. Even Wu Shugu, who was at the back of the team, was laughing loudly as if he had already won. He was just waiting for the results of the battle to expand so that he could find an opportunity to break through. Ha ha ha. Yang Er, who had once again pulled his horse back, laughed heartily. During the battle, he had carefully observed his opponent's scimitar. There were already cracks on it. As expected of a golden armored cavalry, the quality of the scimitar was very good. If it were an ordinary cavalry, it would have already been broken into 2 pieces. Fight one more time, an opportunity will appear. Everyone, get ready. Beta Persei whispered in a voice that only the people around him could hear. Then the soldiers passed the order to each other. Everyone who received the order had a confident expression on their faces at this moment. Charge. After the centurion of the golden armored cavalry shouted, he took the initiative to attack. Charge, try not to kill. Beta Persei's shout came immediately. He was also the first person to rush out on his horse. Compared to the previous few times, the morale of the Black Cavalry was much higher this time. They also knew that it was time to reap the fruits of their labor, so they used a little more force when they attacked. The golden armored cavalry did not know the power of the celestial sword. In fact, they did not have the opportunity to fight with the 5-star army in close combat. They still arranged themselves in a square formation like the previous 2 times, wanting to use overlapping sword techniques to knock down a few people from the 5-star army. Facts also proved that good luck would not always cover one side. When the 2 sides fought again, after the saber and scimitar collided, a scene that the golden armored cavalry could not imagine happened. During the collision, the body of the scimitar broke into 2 halves. Half of the sword that was originally more than 3 feet long was now cut off, leaving only the body of the sword that was still in the hands of the golden armored cavalry. The sudden scene caught the golden armored cavalrymen off guard. Under the overlapping technique, their scimitars were cut in half one after another. Without their scimitars, they screamed in agony as they faced the oncoming Black Cavalry Dragon Guards. Although Beta Persei said to try not to kill, and the Black Cavalry did indeed hold back, under the great force and the sharpness of the celestial sword, the scimitars still fell on the bodies of the golden armored cavalry. However, the scimitars were not in critical positions. In the end, they only injured the golden armored cavalry but did not kill them. One by one, the golden armored cavalry fell from their horses. Even the centurion was slashed by Beta Persei under his ribs, and a half-foot long wound appeared. It was so painful that he could no longer hold the reins of his horse and fell to the ground. Capture them all. At least 3/4 of the 200 golden armored cavalry who were showing off just now had their weapons cut off and fell to the ground, becoming captives of the black cavalry. The remaining less than 50 people turned and fled. At this moment, the general of the golden armored cavalry, Wuxia, was about to lead the army and charge over to save the captured soldiers. In his eyes, every golden armored cavalry was a precious treasure that could not fall into the hands of the enemy. Fire. Xiao Feng, the commander of the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, had been watching from the side. He had just received instructions from Yang Qindong to fire at any time if something went wrong. Now that he saw the golden armored cavalry disregarding the rules, he could not help but sneer. Then, a company of Cold Front soldiers pulled the trigger and bullets fell at the feet of the golden armored cavalry who were about to charge over, forcing them to stay still. They're just a so-so. They're too weak compared to the black cavalry. Even if they were to compete with the 1st Cavalry Division, if they had the same number of people, they would still lose without a doubt. Beta Persei had already retreated to the center of the army and came to Yang Qindong to express his thoughts. Okay. Yang Qindong was waiting for the result of this evaluation. Since the other party's strength was mediocre, they could not be allowed to live. Wuxia watched as more than 100 of his brothers were captured by the Han army. Naturally, his face was filled with anxiety. He looked at the divine weapons in the hands of the black cavalry with envy and resentment. At this moment, how could he not know that the reason why the enemy could win was because of the weapons? If the golden armored cavalry also had such weapons in their hands, would they still be afraid of anyone? Not only Wuxia, many of the golden armored cavalry also thought of the key point. They were all indignant and unwilling to admit defeat, thinking that this was the result of the Han army's tricks. However, he had forgotten that the black cavalry dragon guards had only revealed their powerful side. Both sides had yet to truly clash, and many of the cavalry's skills had yet to be revealed. If they were to truly clash, with the black cavalry dragon guards' armor, the golden armored cavalry would not be able to injure them at all. How could they possibly win? The sound of gunfire stopped the golden armored cavalry's charge. At this moment, Yang Qindong's eyes revealed a trace of impatience. The golden armored cavalry was not as strong as he had imagined. At least, they did not show much strength in the battle just now. Perhaps this was because the Golden Horde had not had an opponent for too long. Since the golden armored cavalry wasn't that powerful, there was no need to spend so much effort to recruit them. Yang Qindong's initial expectations for these golden armored cavalry that were only slightly stronger than ordinary cavalry had now turned into disappointment. They could not even detect the changes in their weapons. Just from this point alone, their observational skills and vigilance were too weak. They could not be called elites. Without a strong desire to conquer, Yang Qindong naturally would not be courteous to the golden armored cavalry. He nodded to the 2nd Division commander Xiao Feng beside him. Then, the soldiers of the Cold Front began to move on a large scale, quickly forming a square formation and surrounding the golden armored cavalry. At this moment, a simple megaphone was placed in front of Yang Qindong. Chapter 1463. The soldiers of the Cold Front started to move, which attracted the curiosity of the surrounding generals. For example, Gray, Qi-Wen, Barry, Yichuo, Erqi, and the other Mongol generals who had surrendered to the Mongol Empire looked at this scene in confusion. Just a moment ago, the Heavenly Khan had clearly shown the intention of recruiting them. Now, he was about to attack. What exactly was going on? Yang Qindong noticed the reactions of the Mongol generals and sneered in his heart. What was he going to do? Of course, he was going to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. No, he was going to kill the monkey to warn the chicken. However, there were times when showing kindness was unable to convince the masses. Only by showing kindness and mercy could he achieve good results. Previously, he had been recruiting talents. In fact, it was inevitable that there would be a mix of good and bad people. There would also be some who had other thoughts in their hearts. However, this did not matter. The current Yang Qindong did not pay attention to these small details. His eyes were more focused on the overall situation. As long as these Mongol cavalry who had surrendered were willing to be used by him, so what if they had their own plans? As long as he was strong enough, these people would not dare to play any tricks. How should he display his strength? Killing the golden armored cavalry was the best warning. Standing in front of the loudspeaker, Yang Qindong's voice rang out in front of everyone. You have been surrounded. I will give you 10 breaths of time to choose whether to surrender or resist. If no one surrenders after 10 breaths, I will kill a row of people. His voice was firm and powerful. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, everyone's gazes landed on the surrounded golden armored cavalry. Gray, Qi Wen, and the other generals were shocked by Yang Qindong's decision. At the very least, if it was them, they would definitely not have the courage to kill elites like the golden armored cavalry. After all, elite cavalry represented a kind of status. In front of the Mongol cavalry, who did not pay attention to economy and relied mostly on robbing, whoever had a strong army would have the strongest strength. It was equivalent to having everything. On the other hand, Yang Qindong should know this principle. He had even recruited the ordinary Mongol cavalry. How could he leave the golden armored cavalry alone? Thinking about it, he was probably just shouting to scare the other party. 10 breaths of time quickly passed. Everyone believed that the Han army would not easily start a massacre. Even Wu Shuge thought so. When the time was up, Yang Qindong lightly tapped his forehead. Division Commander Xiao Feng, who had been paying attention to him, immediately ordered, "Open fire." As his voice fell, the sound of gunfire continued to ring out. After a series of popping sounds, the outermost cavalry of the golden armored cavalry 400 steps away fell down. The blood was dazzling to the eye and the smell was pungent to the nose. All of this indicated to everyone that all of this was really happening. The gunshots frightened all the Mongolian generals. They didn't expect the Khan to be so decisive. He didn't even hesitate to open fire. Yang Qindong snorted coldly in his heart when he saw everyone's expressions. He then said, "The 10 breaths countdown starts now. Do you still want to kill?" When the Mongolian generals heard this, their expressions changed. This time, no one thought that Yang Qindong was joking. Their expressions became serious. The Han army's actions had exceeded their expectations and changed their understanding. The Mongolian generals who thought that everything was in their hands began to panic. No matter what, when things didn't go according to your plan, anyone would feel a sense of trepidation. Furthermore, this involved their future and even their lives. They thought that the Han army needed them. This way, they would have something to rely on and could even bargain. However, the shooting of the golden armored cavalry clearly told them that the Han army did not care much about the Mongolian cavalry and did not need them. Otherwise, why would they kill them so easily? This was the golden armored cavalry, the most elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were the strongest fighting force in the Golden Horde. Normally, Mahama would feel heartache when he lost dozens of men. However, the volley of shots just now was enough to take the lives of over 300 golden armored cavalry. This result shocked the Mongolian generals who had surrendered. The Mongolian generals who had been waiting for the best price all retracted their arrogance and began to think about what to do next to protect their lives and wealth. The 10 breaths are up. Kill. After Yang Qindong nodded lightly again, Commander Xiao Feng's voice rang out once again. It was as if the gates of hell had been opened. This time around, the gunshots were even more intense, and the number of golden armored cavalrymen killed had reached about 500. More and more people died. When the Mongol generals saw the death of the Han army, they were all shocked. This was exactly what Yang Qindong wanted. He did not choose to kill all 20,000 of them at once. It was not that he did not have the ability, but he needed to intimidate them. Now, it seemed that killing them in batches was better than killing them all at once. The effect of killing the monkey to warn the chicken could be achieved. In the golden armored cavalry formation, the expressions of the soldiers had all changed. Just think of how arrogant they usually were. Often, when there was a mission to complete, they didn't need to do anything. They just needed to stand there and their opponents would be afraid. Then, they would be free to do whatever they wanted. But this time, when facing the Han army, not only were they not afraid, but they also did not put him in their eyes. They had become prey for others to take away at will. "General, what should we do?" A few Kiliarchs came to Wuxigu's side and asked anxiously. "Wait a little longer. I don't believe that they will really ignore us. Can't they just kill us all?" Wuxigu said stubbornly. His eyesight was not bad, and he had already seen Gray, Chi-Wen, and the others. Looking at where they were standing, he knew that they had surrendered to the Han army. Since they could be accepted by the Han army, why couldn't they accept the 20,000 golden armored cavalry? He did not surrender not because he was still loyal to the Khan, but because he wanted to wait for the best price. The golden armored cavalry had been established for over 100 years. They had served over a dozen Khans, and they had changed batches after batches. Until now, their loyalty was not as good as before. Furthermore, Mahama had just died, and they had not interacted much with the new Khan, Bo-La. They had not received any favors from him, so there was no need to talk about loyalty. At this moment, they did not believe that they would all die for Bo-La. It was also because of this that Wuxigu did not give the order to break out. It was not that he did not want freedom, but he was afraid of the might of the Han army's firearms. He did not break out just now, and he did not have the courage to do so now. What they needed to do now was to fight for better treatment. Originally, after fighting with the Han army, they should have been able to display their strength and attract the other party's attention. This would naturally be beneficial for the negotiations. However, who would have thought that they would lose so easily? Now, they had lost, and the other party did not seem to see their use. They had started a massacre, and with just 2 gunshots, over 800 golden armored cavalry had died on their horses. If this continued, how long could these 20,000 people last? If they could not hold on, would they have to take the initiative to surrender? Surrendering was already a shameful thing. If they took the initiative to surrender, they would gain nothing. Even if they barely managed to survive, they would be looked down upon. They were the strongest elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were the golden armored cavalry. While Wuxigu was still thinking about something, another 10 breaths of time was up. Another round of gunshots rang out, and around 400 corpses were left behind. "Back, back, let me in." Finally, a golden armored cavalry could not take it anymore. The feeling of stepping on the line between life and death made their expressions change. They wanted to retreat to the center of the cavalry formation. At least they would not feel the sensation of death immediately. "What are you squeezing for? Don't push." "Fuck, if you squeeze again, I'll beat you up." How could the golden armored cavalry in the center of the formation give up their space? That was equivalent to putting themselves in danger. Of course, he would not agree to it since he did not want his friends to die. Now, before the cold spear warriors could fire, the golden armored cavalry's formation was in chaos. In order to get closer to the center so that they wouldn't become the next target of the muskets, some people couldn't help but attack their comrades. Since they were all going to die, they might as well fight it out. Perhaps they could even squeeze into a better position and live a little longer. The formation was in chaos. Wuxigu, who was in the center of the formation, was quickly affected. He saw the golden armored cavalry in front of him retreat. The golden armored cavalry in the back tried to stop them. There were signs of internal strife, and he could no longer sit still. Although surrendering was embarrassing, if his strength was greatly reduced, the Han army would find him a punching bag. If he could not live after surrendering, wouldn't he gain nothing? Wuxigu made up his mind. He could not let things go on like this. "Everyone, quiet down. Don't make any more noise." Wuxia finally stepped forward and roared. Only then did some of the golden-armored cavalrymen who had drawn their swords calm down. Bang, 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 another round of gunshots rang out. Several hundred golden-armored cavalry who were squeezed in the periphery were shot and fell to the ground, leaving behind a group of lonely warhorses. "Don't shoot, we surrender, we surrender." Wuxia was both angry and anxious when he saw that the Han army was still shooting at him even though he had already stood up for them. He was angry because the Han army did not take them seriously. He was anxious because he had to make a decision quickly. Otherwise, the number of golden-armored cavalry would decrease, and he would only be a general in name. Chapter 1464. Worried that another wave of Han soldiers would come, Wuxia could not care about anything else. He urged his horse to charge forward until he reached the front of the cavalry. When he was only 100 steps away from the Han soldiers, he stopped his horse and said, "Stop shooting. I am the general of the golden-armored cavalry, Wuxia. I am here to surrender." "Yes." Yang Qindong didn't recognize Wuxia, so he turned to Gray with a questioning look on his face. "That's right, Heavenly Khan. This person is the general of the golden-armored cavalry. It seems that his surrender must be true. Heaven Khan, please show mercy." Gray used the introduction as an opportunity to plead for mercy. With Gray taking the lead, Qi Wen, Baru, Wu Tuo, and the other generals also began to plead. The golden-armored cavalry was the elite of the Mongol cavalry. It would be a pity if they died like this. Yang Qindong did not immediately reply. Instead, he appeared to be in deep thought. After 5 or 6 breaths, he said, "Originally, I wanted to kill them. However, since you all are pleading for mercy, I will spare their lives. However, while they can avoid death, they cannot escape punishment. From now on, there will be no more golden-armored cavalry. The remaining 20,000 will be divided among the generals." It was fine to leave the golden-armored cavalry, but they had to be scattered. Otherwise, no matter where they were placed, they would cause unease. The 5-star army was not made up of the black cavalry and the elites of the 1st Cavalry Army. If it was an ordinary army, they would be under a lot of pressure when facing the golden-armored cavalry. For safety reasons, this army could not be left alive. When Yang Qindong finished speaking, the eyes of the other Mongol generals lit up. They did not expect that pleading for mercy for their comrades would actually bring them benefits. This was the golden-armored cavalry. Even if they were given a few thousand each, it would still be a very powerful force. Thinking that this was the benefit that Yang Qindong had given them, the generals got off their horses and knelt on the ground. While expressing their gratitude, they were also expressing their loyalty. "Everyone, rise. Since these people have chosen to surrender, I will leave the rest to you. Let's enter the city first." Looking at the majestic new Salai city behind him, Yang Qindong said calmly. The new capital of the Golden Horde would also be trampled under his feet. Considering the death of the old Khan Mahama and the capture of the new Khan Bora, it also indicated the end of the Golden Horde that had lasted for more than 200 years. As the Terminator, Yang Qindong felt proud. Throughout history, it had always been the Mongols finding trouble with the Hans. If anyone could advance 1,000 li and drive them away, it would already be a great achievement. Yet today, he'd actually killed his way to their lair and uprooted them. What sort of great achievement was this? After the 2 great Khans were killed and captured by the Han army, the Golden Horde soldiers hiding within the city were already scared out of their wits. Under the threat of Gray, Qi Wen and the rest, when they saw the hundreds of cannons aimed at the city gates, the Mongol soldiers within the city finally chose to surrender. Compared to the time when Salai city was conquered, the nobles all ran away. This time, it was like catching turtles in a jar, and they were all captured. The Golden Horde had lasted for more than 200 years, and the nobles had also lasted for more than 200 years. The amount of wealth they had accumulated was so great that Yang Qindong was scared out of his wits when She returned the favor. Even though he had made some preparations, and had obtained more than 200 million taels of silver in Salai city, when he heard that he had obtained more than 300 million taels of silver from these nobles, he was still very surprised and happy. Sixth young master, these things are not all silver. Instead, most of them are jewels. They have already been sealed and stored away. Once the silver in Salai city has been transported away, the treasures here will be transported away. When Shay said this, his expression was also very excited. After all, for someone who was used to being poor, suddenly having a mountain of gold in front of them, one could imagine how excited he would be. Yang Chendong's thoughts also returned to his hometown because of this sentence. How much longer will it take for Salai city to settle the issue of seizing and transporting the goods? About 1.5 more months. Sixth young master, as you know, we have seized so much that we have mobilized all the carriages we can, but it will still take a lot of time. When he said this, Shay was also very emotional. He had never thought that one day, he would have a headache because of too much seizing and transporting. 1.5 more months, then let's wait for the goods here to be transported away. Yang Chendong was a little numb, but he was even happier. After all, no one would complain about having too much money, even if he was the lord of Yangxia. Especially when he thought about how much they had seized this time, once they reached Xichen city, and the news spread throughout the world, presumably those who had stopped him from sending troops would all shut their mouths. Reality had already proven that the benefits of opening up a new territory far exceeded everyone's expectations. Just based on this, when Yang Chendong wanted to point his troops elsewhere in the future, no one would come out to stop him. Just as he was thinking about how ugly some people's faces would be after the news spread, an indescribable smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. After a while, when Yang Chendong was almost done rejoicing, he noticed that Shaybi was still standing in front of him. Is there something else? Sixth young master, there is something. Shaybi said with a conflicted expression. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong and Shaybi had known each other for many years, and he admired Shaybi's abilities. Reality had also proven that Shaybi was a person who could remain calm and make his own decisions when faced with big matters. However, he did not know what was so difficult for him. Commander Shay, there are no outsiders here. If you have something to say, just say it. Yang Chendong's expression returned to normal. Yes. Originally, Shaybi did not know how to phrase the matter he wanted to report. However, seeing that Yang Chendong did not treat him as an outsider, he decided to speak the truth. He immediately bent his knees and knelt down. Sixth young master, please restrain the Mongolian cavalry who just surrendered. You don't know, but the city is in a mess because of them. The citizens are complaining and many of them are already thinking of moving out. What? There's such a thing? Yang Chendong suddenly stood up from his chair. His expression was extremely ugly at this moment, and there was even a faint killing intent that flowed out. Yes, sixth young master, you only need to send people to check the streets to see if what I said is true or false. Although those surrendered generals have some merits, they should not treat the citizens like this. If this continues, I'm afraid there will be a big problem. Since he had already started, he didn't hesitate to say what he wanted to say next. He said whatever came to his mind. Even if he offended those surrendered generals, he was willing to accept it. When he heard that there would be a big problem, Yang Chendong knew that things must have reached a point where they could not be controlled. Otherwise, Shaybi, who was always calm when faced with problems, would not say such words. How long has it been? He was naturally asking how long the chaos had been in the city. Shaybi's heart shook. He knew that Yang Chendong had found the crux of the matter. He lowered his head and said, replying to the sixth young master, it has been 4 days. 4 days. We've only been in New Sarai city for 4 days. Does that mean they've been here since they entered the city? Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with a murderous aura. It was no wonder that he was so angry. Before entering the city, he had told his generals that they were not to disturb the citizens after entering the city. In the future, the citizens here would be Yangxia's citizens and they must be treated well. He remembered that the generals agreed very happily at that time. But looking at Shaybi's words, it seemed that no one took his words seriously. Seeing Yang Chendong's killing intent, Shabi replied with some trepidation, yes. After they entered the city, the surrendered soldiers began to loot. At first, it was targeted at the rich and powerful, but later on, even the commoners became the targets of the loot. Listening to Shabi's report, Yang Chendong's face was as calm as water. Since it has been 4 days, why did you only report it now? This. Shabi did not know how to answer. Fortunately, Yang Chendong then said the answer. You don't think that they are the surrendered generals? Without them, we would not have won this battle so easily, so they are the meritorious officials. It is not good to report the meritorious officials. It will make people misunderstand that you are jealous, right? Yes. It is just that this general is not jealous. It is just that they have all performed meritorious deeds. If we attack them now, I fear that there will be people who will think otherwise. If that happens, it will not be good for your reputation, 6th young master. Shabi explained. My reputation will not be good? Ha, what is reputation? Shabi, it seems that you still have a lot to learn. You don't know that reputation is just a way for some people to express their opinions. However, true reputation is that the commoners can eat well, wear warm clothes, and live in peace and contentment. Only then can you be considered a qualified monarch. If you can't do this, even if everyone praises you, is it really good? Hearing Yang Chendong's sincere and heartfelt words, Shabi nodded repeatedly and said, yes, this general understands. What should be said had been said. Now, it was up to Shabi to comprehend it himself. However, the matter of the surrendered soldiers looting had to be resolved. Shabi, immediately send the order. Have the surrendered soldiers come to this prince for a meeting. Was this raising the butcher's knife? Shabi thought in his heart. He nodded repeatedly and said, yes, this general will go and pass the order. It had been 4 days since Yang Chendong led the army into New Salai city. In these few days, Yang Chendong stayed in Mahama's golden tent and did not go out. There were simply too many good things here. Some of them could be said to be priceless existences. Even Yang Chendong was not an exception. He did his best to play with each item for a while. Chapter 1465. Because of this, they did not know what was happening outside. Moreover, because these surrendered generals did things methodically, the place where they looted was far away from the golden tent. Therefore, even the black cavalry did not notice. If it was not for Yubi's report, it would probably take a day or two or something big to report. As soon as Yubi left, Yang Chendong immediately asked Beta Persei to call the manager of the city's intelligence department to find out what had happened in the city in the past 4 days. Soon, Beta Persei returned and found out more details from him. His story was even more interesting than Yubi's. According to the data reported by the intelligence department, the number of civilians killed and injured because of the looting reached more than 200. As for the injured, there were countless more. Good, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Yang Chendong said angrily. At this moment, he really wanted to kill all the surrendered soldiers who looted. However, he also knew that this was not the action of a wise man. Doing this would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. What he wanted was for all the surrendered generals to reflect on this matter from the bottom of their hearts, and not rely on government orders to restrain them. After more than 2 hours, the surrendered generals in the city rushed to the golden tent. Some of them were more than 10 miles away, and rushed over as soon as they heard the news. When they arrived, they had a confused look on their faces. Obviously, they did not understand why the heavenly Khan suddenly summoned them. As the leader of the generals, Gray's mind was also a mess. However, he was not as flustered as everyone else. On the contrary, he sat quietly in the hall and drank tea like the Han people. He was very clear that if he wanted to integrate into the Han army, he had to do his best to maintain the same habits as them. This was the best way to get closer to them. In contrast, the other generals did not have the time to be so calm. They sat on their chairs and made a lot of noise, just like when the Golden Horde held a meeting. there was no change at all. Among them, Bodo's voice was the loudest. This former scout general of the Golden Horde eventually surrendered to the Han army and retained his position as a general. Perhaps it was because he was a scout general, but he understood the situation in New Sarai better than anyone else, so he knew better than anyone else who had the most silver. So in this battle, he was the one who profited the most. Of course, Bodo wasn't an insensible person. After looting a lot of gold and silver, he took out a portion of it to show his filial piety to other people and comrades. For example, General Gray, Baruch, and Wutu all received a share. He even gave money to Shibi, Ahuli, Wushugu, and the others. Unfortunately, these people did not accept it and returned it. However, Bodo didn't mind. It was only because they were all Mongolians that he decided to share the good fortune with them. Especially Shirbei. He heard that Shirbei was a commander in the Han army. Although he did not know what this meant, it should be a high position. However, no matter how high his position was, he couldn't control himself. His immediate superior was Gray. As long as he served Gray well, there wouldn't be any problems. At this moment, Bodo was talking about robbing a rich family. He was talking about how he rushed into the house of a noble from the Golden Horde and dug out his hidden treasures. When the noble knelt down and begged for mercy, Baruch and Wutu, who were listening at the side, laughed along. Obviously, such a noble was an unreachable existence in the past. Even if they met him, he wouldn't even look at them in the eye. But now, he actually had to kneel down and beg for mercy. That feeling couldn't be any better. At this moment, Yang Qindong walked into the hall under the protection of Beta Persei and a group of black cavalry soldiers. Instantly, the hall became extremely quiet. Even Bodo kept his mouth shut. In fact, the scene of Yang Qindong ordering the golden armored cavalry to be cleaned up brought too much shock to everyone. This person was someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill if he couldn't be used. He didn't have the humble, courteous, and forgiving personality of the Han people. Evil people would naturally be dealt with by evil people. It was precisely because of Yang Qindong's performance that the Mongolian generals were afraid of him from the bottom of their hearts. Yang Qindong strode into the hall and arrived at the head of the table. Then, he suddenly turned around and fiercely swept his gaze across everyone present. Following Yang Qindong's gaze, everyone who met his gaze quickly lowered their heads. Obviously, everyone was afraid of his gaze. Seeing that everyone had lowered their heads, even Bodo, who was very active just now, Yang Qindong coldly snorted and said, "Men, take Bodo out and chop him up." Yes. The black cavalry soldiers who had been waiting for a long time stepped forward with their swords and went straight for Bodo, who was still sitting on the chair and hadn't recovered from his shock. "What are you doing?" Just as the black cavalry was 2 steps away, Bodo finally reacted. He pulled out his sword and placed it in front of his chest, then shouted, "Why do you want to kill me? Why? You still dare to resist?" Seeing Bodo's seemingly instinctive reaction, Beta Persei was amused. While laughing, he moved one of his wrists. However, before he could step forward, Ba Daojiang had already rushed out and said, "How can we use second brother's great self to deal with a clown like this? I'll take care of him." "You." Seeing Ba Daojiang rush out first, Beta Persei's face was filled with anger. However, he quickly calmed down. They were all brothers, so it didn't matter who did the teaching. Moreover, just as Ba Daojiang said, a small scout general wasn't worthy of him taking the initiative. Ba Daojiang rushed out. This former member of the Jianghu wasn't weak to begin with, and after years of experience, he was even more agile and powerful. He leaped forward and arrived in front of Bodo in 2 quick steps. Then, without waiting for Bodo to swing his sword, he kicked out, and a curved sword fell from the air. After kicking the curved sword out of Bodo's hand, Ba Daojiang followed up with a roundhouse kick to Bodo's chest. Under the powerful force, a cracking sound was heard, and Bodo's chest caved in. Your legs are getting stronger again." Yang Qindong looked at the scene with admiration and nodded his head in satisfaction. Bodo, whose chest caved in from the kick, fell to the ground with a plop. At that moment, blood was flowing out from the corner of his mouth, and he looked like he was about to die. Even so, his gaze was still fixed on Gray. Although his mouth was open, no sound came out. However, if one looked closely, they could see that he was saying the words, "Save me. Tie him up and take him out for beheading. Don't dirty this place." Ba Daojiang had already stabilized himself as he spoke in a casual tone. Then, he swept his cold gaze towards the other Mongolian generals in the hall. Revealing a harmless smile, he walked back to Beta Persei's side. "Not bad." Seeing Ba Daojiang's return, Beta Persei gave him a thumbs up with a look of praise. Compared to the interaction between the two of them, the other Mongolian generals were all dumbfounded. They didn't understand why Ba Daojiang had come forward to kill someone. This was something they had never experienced before. Even when Mahama was the Khan, he hadn't been so tyrannical. It was said that accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. At this moment, everyone finally understood. And it was precisely for some unknown reason that everyone couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Furthermore, everyone was deep in thought. Had they done something that they shouldn't have done recently? Would the next person to be pulled out to be beheaded would be themselves? The hall was even quieter than before. This sudden scene caused the Mongol generals to fall into deep thought. At this moment, Yang Chendong spoke again. "Gray, Baruch, Yutu, do you know your crimes?" The three people who were called out were sweating even more now. They hurriedly left their chairs and knelt on the ground with a plop. Their heads were so close to the ground that they had zero contact with it. It was no wonder that the three of them were so nervous. After all, Bodo had just been killed. They were really worried that they would have the same ending. As for what they had done wrong, they really didn't know. However, at this moment, the three of them were smart enough not to say anything. Instead, they knelt on the ground and kowtowed continuously while saying, "We are guilty, guilty. Yes, you are indeed guilty. This Khan has repeatedly ordered that you are not allowed to disturb the people in the city. But what did you do? You clearly knew about Bodo's evil deeds, but not only did you not stop him, you even dared to accept his benefits. I think you are all accomplices." Yang Chendong's strict voice rang out. Hearing that it was actually this matter, the Mongolian generals present had an enlightened look on their faces. At this moment, they finally understood why Bodo had been beheaded. For a moment, many of them rejoiced that they hadn't been possessed to do such a thing. They couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. However, the three people kneeling on the ground all had nervous expressions on their faces. Although they hadn't sent their troops to rob Bodo, they had indeed received a gift from the robber, Bodo. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were accomplices. When they thought about Bodo's fate, they were afraid that Yang Chendong would kill them as well. Gray abruptly raised his head and said with a nervous expression, "Heavenly Khan, we were wrong, we were wrong. Please give us another chance on account of our loyalty to you and our contributions to the army." When Gray mentioned contributions, Yang Chendong couldn't help but frown. Just based on this sentence, he had already sentenced Gray to death in his heart. However, just as Gray had said, he had indeed contributed to the army. If Gray was really killed on the spot, it was inevitable that the other Mongolian generals would have other thoughts. This was especially so when the people present included He, a general who had defected to the 5-star army under his influence. Thus, Gray's punishment had to be extremely careful. Chapter 1466. Yang Chendong took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. When he looked at Gray, his expression became much calmer. "That's right. The three of you have performed meritorious deeds. Since that's the case, this Khan will give you a chance. Next, we will move against the Ross Empire. The three of you will lead the death squad as the vanguard. If you perform meritorious deeds, you will naturally be reinstated. As for Gray's current position, Ahuli will temporarily take over. What do you think?" Yang Chendong's tone changed. In Gray's ears, it was like spring. Knowing that he wouldn't have to die, how could he disagree? He immediately knelt and cupped his fists. I am willing to be the generals of the death squad. I am willing to serve the Khan. Good. Yang Qindong revealed a satisfied expression at Gray. Then, he looked at everyone and said in a clear voice, everyone, you are no longer generals of the Golden Horde. Instead, you are generals of the 5-star army. Since that's the case, you will have to abide by the military rules here. This Khan will say this once more. As soldiers of the 5-star army, you are not allowed to bully the citizens or disrupt the military rules. If there is a next time, no matter who it is, no matter what contributions they have made, they will be severely punished. Huli will keep a close eye on this matter. If anyone disobeys, you can kill them first and report later. Huli was the former Khan of Zhongxing. Under his rule, the citizens of the city lived a good life. He could be said to be a different kind of person in the Mongolian army. He was an ambitious general who wholeheartedly wanted to change the lives of the citizens. He was the most suitable candidate to replace Gray as the leader of the Mongolian army and to deal with the security issues in the city. Although he was only a temporary representative, what if Gray never came back? Huli didn't know what Yang Qindong was thinking, but he could feel that the other party valued him. He immediately knelt on the ground and said sincerely, thank you, Great Khan, for thinking so highly of me. Huli will do my best to not let you down. From the beginning to the end of the meeting, only 15 minutes had passed. After killing Bodo, reprimanding Gray, and promoting Huli, Yang Qindong left. It was precisely because of this that the shorter the time they came into contact with Yang Qindong, the more mysterious he was, causing others to not dare look down upon Yang Qindong in the slightest. However, in this short 15 minutes, the pressure on the Mongol army was immense. After seeing how Yang Qindong dealt with Bodo, everyone knew that the Heavenly Khan was an iron-blooded person. He wouldn't let sand get in his eyes. Such a person wasn't easy to fool, and no one dared to fool him. As for giving a chance to Gray, Barlow, and Wu Tuo, this proved that the Heavenly Khan was someone who cherished old friendships. Not only did he not incur the disgust of everyone by dealing with the three of them, he even stripped them of their military authority. On the contrary, everyone felt that following him was the right thing to do. At the very least, they wouldn't erase their previous military exploits because of a small matter. They should make more military exploits so that they would be safe. Just borrowing a person's head had produced such an effect. After hearing this, Shirbei couldn't help but sigh. The sixth young master was indeed the sixth young master. His methods of solving problems weren't something he could compare to. After this incident, the public security in New Sarai immediately improved. Ordinary people were no longer bullied, and under Huli's leadership, the stolen property was returned untouched. Yang Qindong's reputation also resounded throughout this land. Using this opportunity, Yang Qindong called Huli over and gave him the order to deal with the Churkas and Alans. Remember, any forces that oppose us must be completely eradicated. There can only be one voice here, and that is to die if you don't surrender. This time, I'll give you 200,000 Mongol soldiers and enough provisions. At the same time, I'll equip you with a firearm regiment and 50 field cannons. Do you have any other questions? After calling Huli over, Yang Qindong instructed him. Being able to lead an army alone was somewhat beyond Huli's expectations. He was just a surrendered general. Although he had been a Khan before, he only led 30,000 soldiers. But now, he could lead 200,000 soldiers with the support of guns and cannons. This was something he had never dreamed of. This general will do his best to complete this mission and live up to the Heavenly Khan's expectations. At this moment, Huli couldn't wait to dig out his heart and give it to Yang Qindong to repay his kindness. Feeling Huli's excitement, Yang Qindong got up and walked in front of him. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Very good, this Khan is looking forward to your performance. By the way, I'll also give you the 20,000 golden armored cavalry. Make good use of them. This is a force that can't be ignored." Yang Qindong didn't think highly of the golden armored cavalry, especially after knowing that after many years of development, their strength was no longer as strong as before, so he didn't think highly of them. But if he left them to Huli to deal with the other Mongol tribes, they would still be a force to be reckoned with. Just the golden armored cavalry alone wouldn't be able to harm them with ordinary swords. Yes, yes. Huli kept nodding his head and making a promise. After arranging Huli's affairs, Yang Qindong began to prepare for the invasion of Russia. As the leader of Xianxia and the founder of the 5-star army, it was destined that he couldn't stay in one place for too long. It had been 3 years since he entered the Far East. According to his plan, he had to deal with the situation here this year. Fortunately, the Golden Horde had been destroyed, so he had already completed half of his mission. The next step was to deal with the White Russians. Facing an enemy that relied more on outdated firearms, Yang Qindong was full of confidence. 7 days later, Huli, who had made sufficient preparations, led 200,000 Mongol surrendered soldiers out of New Salai and went straight to the Cherkass camp. Half a month later, a large number of horses flooded into the city. They were all responsible for transporting gold and silver. Following the arrival of this army, Yang Qindong also led the 200,000 Mongol soldiers, the new Second Army, and the remaining 3 firearm regiments and an artillery regiment of the 2nd Cold Front Division out of the city. They headed straight for the Rossi Duchy's territory. Rossi Duchy's capital, Moscow. It was currently shrouded in dark clouds. In the main hall of the duchy, the blind Grand Justice looked at the scout general with a gloomy expression as he reported the battle report. Since last winter, the Rossi Duchy had been preparing to send troops north. They wanted to chase out the Han army that occupied the northernmost city, Oksino. For this, they had made a lot of preparations, such as military supplies, provisions, firearms, cannons, and even war horses. They were just waiting for the coming year to show their might. But before they could send troops north, they had received news that the Han army was going to attack the Golden Horde. They had also heard that the Han army was coming aggressively, with more than 100,000 soldiers. When they first heard the news, the important officials and nobles of the Rossi Duchy did not take it seriously. Everyone only cared about what benefits they could gain from this battle. After a heated discussion in the court, the final conclusion was to stop sending troops north and focus on the east. They would wait for the Han army to be defeated by the Golden Horde, then they would take the opportunity to strike and reap the benefits. When the time was right, they would send troops north. It would be easy for them to take back Oksino. However, the outcome of the battle was far beyond everyone's expectations. The Han army quickly breached Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde, forcing Mahama Khan to retreat to the city of Shinsa to avoid the brunt of the attack. Not only that, the tough Mahama even sent an envoy to ask for help from the Rossi Duchy. The two sides had been fighting for many years, and it was more appropriate to call them old enemies. During this time, they had won and lost some, but no one had expected that the two would one day join forces, and that the Golden Horde would take the initiative to ask for help. As for the envoy sent by the Golden Horde, the blind Duke arranged for someone to send him to the post house, and then he came to discuss this matter with the other officials. Regarding this matter, the officials had two opinions. One was to send troops, and the other was to not send troops. The reason for not sending troops was to use the Han army to deal a heavy blow to the Golden Horde, which would be more beneficial to the Rossi Duchy's independence and unification. The reason for sending troops was to prevent the Han army from becoming too powerful. After all, Mahama was a very proud person. Even he had to lower himself to ask for help. This showed that the Han army's fighting strength was very strong. If he didn't help, once the Han army really subdued the Golden Horde, he wouldn't have anything to worry about when fighting with the Han army in the future. Yes, even at this time, the Rossi people still believed that although the Han army was strong, they could only defeat the Golden Horde and not defeat it. The Golden Horde could summon hundreds of thousands of cavalry at any time with a decree, and the Rossi people had already experienced the strength of the Golden Horde. No one could defeat the Golden Horde, at least not in the short term. This had become the consensus of the Rossi people. The meeting lasted for a long time, and in the end, the people who wanted to send reinforcements had the upper hand. The blind duke finally decided to send reinforcements, but it would take time to send the troops from the north to the east. They did not have the convenience of carrying food with them like the 5-star army, so they needed a lot of time to prepare. Finally, 10 days later, the 100,000 reinforcements prepared by the Rossi started their journey. This was thanks to the previous preparations, otherwise, they would not have been able to set off so quickly. But at this time, new news came. The Han army was already outside New Sarai, engaged in a major battle with the Golden Horde, and finally won. They killed Muhammad Khan with cannon fire, and captured Bora Khan. Hundreds of thousands of Mongolian cavalry were defeated, and the Golden Horde was about to become history. The Rossi people's enemy also changed from the Golden Horde to the Han army. When the news came, the entire Rossi people were shocked. Many people did not believe the truth of this matter. Although more than one group of scouts reported the same news, there were still many people who did not believe it. How could the powerful Golden Horde be destroyed so easily? Even if it was destroyed, it should be done by the powerful Rossi people. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.